On my 69th birthday, I stood in the pouring rain outside the French restaurant where I had dined with my late wife for 40 years. Inside, through the fogged glass, I saw my daughter and my son-in-law raising champagne flutes in a toast. They were not waiting for me. They were not worried that I was late. They were celebrating my destruction. I was about to turn away, broken and convinced that I had finally lost my mind, when a stranger stepped out of the shadows. He was a young father holding a sleeping toddler against his chest, and he whispered a sentence that stopped my heart cold. He did not ask for money. He handed me the truth. That moment was the end of the man I used to be, and the birth of the man who would bring them all down. I am Emmett Clay. I spent 30 years as a structural engineer building bridges that connected cities. Yet I failed to build the one bridge that mattered most, the one to my own daughter's heart. I am a widower, a man of logic and concrete. But until 3 days ago, I thought I was losing my grip on reality. I want to tell you how a simple dinner reservation revealed a conspiracy that almost cost me my freedom. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand tall when your own blood tried to bring you to your knees. I arrived at Les Jardins at 7 in the evening sharp. I was wearing the charcoal suit my wife Coretta had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It was a little loose around the waist now, as my appetite had never quite returned after she passed. But I had pressed the shirt myself and polished my shoes until they reflected the street lights. This was a tradition. Table 9. The corner booth near the kitchen where the smell of roasted duck always lingered. It was where I proposed to Coretta, and it was where I promised to honor her memory every year on my birthday. I walked up to the heavy oak podium at the entrance, shaking the rain from my umbrella. The warmth of the restaurant rushed out to meet me, smelling of butter and expensive wine. I felt a rare smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in months, I felt like Emmett Clay, the respected engineer, not just the old man who forgot where he put his reading glasses. The manager, a man with a thin mustache who had known me for a decade, did not smile back. He looked at me, then looked down at his reservation book, and then back at me with a gaze that was polite but completely cold. I told him I had a reservation for 3, myself, my daughter Jasmine, and her husband Brent. I assumed they were already seated. I moved to step past him, eager to get out of the damp entryway. He stepped in front of me. His hand did not touch my chest, but it hovered there, a barrier more solid than steel. He told me quietly that he could not seat me tonight. I thought he was joking. I laughed a little, an awkward sound that died in my throat when I saw the look of pity in the hostess's eyes behind him. I asked him to check the list again. I told him I made the reservation 2 weeks ago. I told him it was my birthday. The manager lowered his voice. He said that Mrs. Jasmine had called earlier that afternoon. She had canceled the table for 3 and rebooked a private table for 2. She had given specific instructions that I was not to be allowed inside. He said she warned them that I was having an episode. She told them I was mentally unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and that my presence would disturb the other guests. My mouth fell open. I looked at him, trying to find the logic in his words. Unstable. Violent. Me. I have never raised a hand to anyone in my life. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him that my daughter was mistaken, that there was a misunderstanding, but he was already signaling to the security guard near the door. He told me to leave the premises before he had to call the police. He said he did not want a scene. The shame hit me harder than a physical blow. I was being treated like a vagrant, like a danger to society, at the very place where I had celebrated the happiest moments of my life. I was pushed out the door. The heavy wood slammed shut behind me, engaging the lock with a final metallic click. I stood under the awning for a moment, but the security guard stared at me through the glass until I stepped off the curb and into the relentless rain. The water soaked through my charcoal suit in seconds. The cold seeped into my bones, making my arthritic knee throb, but I could not move. I just stood there on the sidewalk, shivering, staring into the restaurant. Through the large front window, past the condensation and the golden glow of the chandeliers, I saw them. Table 9. My table. Coretta's table. My daughter Jasmine was sitting there. She looked beautiful in the emerald dress I had bought her for Christmas, but her face was not the face of a grieving daughter worried about her father's mental health. She was laughing. She had her head thrown back, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm. And Brent, my son-in-law, the man who had moved into my house 3 years ago promising to help me manage the property. He was holding a bottle of vintage champagne. I watched as he poured the bubbling liquid into Jasmine's glass. He said something that made her giggle and cover her mouth. They clinked glasses. The contrast between my reality and theirs was so sharp it made me dizzy. Out here, the world was gray, wet, and hostile. I was cold, hungry, and humiliated. In there, it was warm, golden, and joyous. They were eating the escargot I loved. They were drinking the wine I had saved for special occasions, and they were doing it without me. A terrible thought took root in my mind. They were not just having dinner. You do not drink $200 champagne on a Tuesday night just for dinner. This was a celebration, but what were they celebrating on the night they had banned me from the table? I watched Brent raise his glass again. His face was flushed with the arrogance I had always suspected lay beneath his polite smiles. He looked like a man who had just won a lottery. Jasmine looked less triumphant, but she was compliant. She was nodding at whatever he was saying, her eyes wide and trusting. I felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with hunger. They had told the restaurant I was crazy. They had lied to keep me out. Why? If they wanted to have a romantic dinner, they could have just told me. I would have understood. I would have stayed home. But to humiliate me, to destroy my reputation with the manager I had known for years, this was calculated. This was cruel. I took a step closer to the window, my hand reaching out to tap on the glass to demand an answer, but my reflection stopped me. I saw myself in the dark glass, a wet, disheveled old man with wild eyes and soaking wet hair plastered to his skull. I looked exactly like the crazy person they said I was. If I banged on the glass now, I would only prove them right. The police would come. I would be arrested. And Brent would shake his head and say, "See, I told you he was losing it." I lowered my hand. I felt small. I felt erased. For the first time since Coretta died, I felt truly, completely alone in the universe. I turned away from the window, ready to walk into the dark, ready to go home and accept that maybe I really was getting too old. Maybe I really was a burden. That was when I bumped into him. I was so blinded by the rain and my own misery that I did not see the figure standing in the shadows of the alleyway next to the restaurant. I stumbled, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. A strong hand grabbed my elbow, steadying me. I looked up, expecting the security guard again, expecting another insult. But it was a young man. He was African American, perhaps 30 years old, wearing a faded mechanic's jacket that had seen better days. He was shielding a small boy, maybe 3 years old, inside his coat to keep him dry. The young man's face was thin, his eyes tired, deeply set with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and hard labor. But his grip on my arm was firm. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition. He pulled me slightly deeper into the shelter of the awning, out of the direct line of sight of the restaurant window. He looked back at the window, at table 9, where Brent was now laughing at something on his phone. The young man's jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek jumped. He asked me if I was the father. He did not need me to answer. He saw the resemblance in my face, and he saw the way I had been staring at Jasmine. I nodded slowly, water dripping from the brim of my nose. I expected him to ask for money. I reached for my wallet, thinking that perhaps this was just a homeless man looking for a handout, and in that moment, I would have given him everything I had just for a moment of human connection. But he shook his head. He put his hand over mine to stop me from opening my wallet. He told me to keep my money. He said I was going to need it. The tone of his voice changed. It dropped an octave, becoming urgent and sharp. He told me that he had been standing there for 20 minutes, waiting for the rain to stop so he could walk his son to the shelter down the street. He told me the window was cracked open at the top for ventilation. He told me he could hear everything. I looked at him, confused. I asked him what he meant. The young man, whose name I would later learn was Tavon, leaned in close. He smelled of rain and engine oil and cheap soap. He whispered into my ear, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. He told me that the man inside, the one in the expensive suit, was not toasting to my health. He said he heard Brent tell my daughter that the papers were ready. I froze. What papers? Tavon looked me dead in the eye. He said Brent told her that the house was sold, not listed, sold. The deal was closing tomorrow morning at 9. But that was not the worst part. Tavon hesitated, glancing down at his sleeping son, then back at me. He said he heard Brent say that the only loose end was me. He said they were celebrating because tomorrow, after the sale, I was not coming home. He said Brent used the word facility. He said Brent laughed and told my daughter that by this time tomorrow, the old man would be locked away where he could not mess up the deal. The world stopped spinning. The rain seemed to freeze in midair. Sold my house. Locked away. Facility. The words bounced around my skull like bullets. Tavon squeezed my arm again, harder this time, grounding me. He told me that I needed to wake up. He said that looking at me now, he could tell I was not crazy, but if I went home tonight and acted like a victim, I would be exactly where they wanted me. He told me that man inside ruined his life 3 years ago with a rental scam, and he would be damned if he watched him do it to an elder. He told me to wipe my face. He told me to stand up straight. He said that if I wanted to survive the next 24 hours, I had to stop being a father and start being a soldier. Because war had just been declared on me, and I was the only one who didn't know it yet. I looked at the young man standing before me in the rain, and my first instinct was denial. I wanted to pull my arm away from his grip. I wanted to tell him that he was mistaken and that the man inside drinking champagne was my family. I wanted to say that Brent was arrogant but not a criminal. But the look in Tavon's eyes stopped me. It was a look of shared trauma. He was not trying to scare me. He was trying to save me. Tavon shifted the weight of his sleeping son in his arms and told me exactly who Brent really was. He spoke quickly, and his voice cut through the sound of the falling rain like a knife. He told me that 3 years ago he had a steady job and a small apartment in a complex managed by Brent's real estate firm. He said he was never late on rent, not even once. Then one day he came home to find his locks changed and his belongings on the curb. He told me Brent had invoked a hidden clause in the lease agreement about property maintenance standards. A clause printed in font so small you would need a microscope to read it. Tavon said he tried to fight it. He went to the office to show his receipts. He tried to show them that he had actually improved the apartment. But Brent did not look at the receipts. Brent just smiled that same oily smile I had seen at the dinner table and told Tavon that if he caused a scene he would call Child Protective Services and tell them Tavon was providing an unstable environment for his son. Tavon told me he lost everything that day. He lost his deposit, he lost his credit rating, he lost the roof over his son's head. He looked at me with tears mixing with the rain on his face and said that Brent does not just steal money. He steals lives. He steals your credibility so that when you scream for help, nobody listens. He pointed a trembling finger toward the glowing window of the restaurant. He told me that he recognized the pattern. He said Brent isolates the victim. He cuts off their support system. He makes them doubt their own sanity. And then when they are weak and alone, he takes everything. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I remembered the papers Brent had asked me to sign last week. He said they were just standard updates for my health insurance policy. I had not read them closely. I trusted him. I trusted the man who slept next to my daughter. Tavon grabbed my shoulder again and shook me slightly. He told me that I did not have to believe him, but I had to check for myself. He told me to go to the bank. He told me to check my balance right now before the banks closed for the weekend or before the system updated at midnight. He said if I was wrong, then I could call him a liar and walk away. But if I was right, then I needed to disappear before they found me. I backed away from him. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did not say goodbye. I turned and ran down the wet pavement. I ran past the closed shops and the parked cars. I ran until my lungs burned and my bad knee screamed in protest, but I did not stop until I reached the 24-hour ATM vestibule of my bank 3 blocks away. I burst inside. The air was dry and smelled of stale electricity and dust. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sick yellow hue that made my skin look gray in the reflection of the safety glass. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my wallet twice before I could fish out my debit card. It was the blue card Coretta and I had shared for 40 years, the card that held our life savings, the money from selling my engineering patents, the money for our retirement, the money intended for Jasmine's future. I stared at the card. It looked normal. It felt solid in my hand. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself that Tavon was just a bitter man projecting his bad luck onto me. Brent was family. Jasmine was my little girl. They would never do this. I jammed the card into the slot. The machine whirred and swallowed it. I waited. The screen prompted me for my PIN. I typed it in. 1954. The year Coretta was born. I pressed enter. The machine paused. It seemed to take longer than usual. The mechanical hum grew louder in the silence of the empty room. I held my breath. I expected to see the menu: withdrawal, deposit, check balance. Instead, the screen flashed red. A message appeared in bold block letters that I will never forget as long as I live. Transaction denied. Card retained by issuer. Contact legal guardian for authorization. I stared at the words, legal guardian. The words made no sense. I was 69 years old. I was a grown man. I was a homeowner. I had no guardian. I pressed the cancel button. I hit it again and again. I pounded my fist on the plastic keys. Give me my card back. The machine did not respond. It had eaten my identity. It had swallowed my freedom. The screen flickered back to the welcome message as if nothing had happened, as if it had not just stripped me of my dignity. I stood there in my wetsuit and realized Tavon was right. The papers I signed were not for insurance, they were for power of attorney. They were a declaration of incompetence. In the eyes of the bank and in the eyes of the law, I was no longer Emmett Clay the engineer. I was Emmett Clay the dependent. I was a child. I was property. I checked my pockets for cash. I had $40 and some loose change. That was it. That was all I was worth in this world. The realization brought me to my knees. I slumped against the cold metal wall of the vestibule and gasped for air. I needed to hear her voice. I needed my daughter to tell me this was a mistake. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were wet and slippery, and I had trouble unlocking the screen. I found Jasmine's contact. My thumb hovered over her name. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike. I remembered walking her down the aisle toward Brent. I remembered the way she cried at her mother's funeral and promised we would always take care of each other. I pressed call. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. I imagined her phone vibrating on the white tablecloth next to the champagne bucket. I imagined her glancing at the screen, seeing the word Dad, and flipping it over to silence it. The call went to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice told me she was busy living her best life and to leave a message. I could not speak. I hung up. I stared at the phone. Then I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I called Brent. I needed to know the depth of the betrayal. I needed to hear the lie from the source. He answered on the second ring. The background noise was loud. I heard clinking glasses and the murmur of a crowded room. Then the noise dampened as if he had stepped into a hallway or a bathroom. His voice came through the speaker smooth and calm and terrifyingly normal. "Hey, Pops, is everything okay?" The casual use of the nickname made my stomach turn. I asked him where he was. I asked him why my bank card was not working. I asked him why the machine said I had a guardian. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where I could hear him breathing. Then he spoke and his tone shifted. It was the tone you use with a confused toddler or a disobedient dog. "Pops, are you having an episode again? We talked about this. You gave me the card for safekeeping yesterday. Remember, you were confused. You were trying to give money to strangers on the street." I told him that was a lie. I shouted into the phone that I was perfectly sane and that I was at the bank right now. Brent sighed. It was a sigh of deep, practiced patience. "Pops, listen to me. You are confused. You are not at the bank. You are probably wandering around the neighborhood again. Just stay where you are. Tell me what street signs you see. I will come get you, and we can take you back to the facility so you can rest." The facility. He used the word Tavon had heard. He was not talking about home. He was talking about a cage. And the way he said it, so smooth, so convincing. If I did not know better, I would have believed him myself. That is the true horror of gaslighting. It does not just challenge your facts, it challenges your reality. He was rewriting my history in real time. He was creating a narrative where I was the sick one and he was the savior. I realized then that if I let him pick me up, I would never be seen again. I would disappear into a system designed to silence men like me. I looked at the security camera in the corner of the ATM vestibule. I knew he could probably track my phone. I was running out of time. I did not answer him. I ended the call and powered off the phone. I stood up. The old Emmett Clay died in that bank lobby. The man who walked out into the rain was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. The cab ride home cost me the last $30 in my wallet. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, did not say a word to me, but he watched me in the rearview mirror the entire time. He saw a 69-year-old black man in a soaking wetsuit shivering uncontrollably. He probably thought I was a drunk who had been kicked out of a bar. He was not entirely wrong. I had been kicked out, but not from a bar. I had been kicked out of my own life. When he pulled up to the curb of the 2-story colonial house on Maple Street, I felt a surge of possessiveness. I bought this house 30 years ago. I laid the brick for the garden path with my own hands. I installed the porch light that was currently flickering in the rain. This was my castle, or at least it was supposed to be. I waited for the taxi to drive away before I walked up the driveway. I did not want any witnesses. I stepped onto the porch and reached into my pocket for my keys. My fingers brushed against the brass metal, and for a second I felt a sense of relief. I was home. I could go inside, dry off, and wake up from this nightmare. I slid the key into the deadbolt. It stopped halfway. I frowned and wiggled it, and it would not go in. I leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. My heart sank. The lock was different. The old brass cylinder I had oiled every winter was gone. In its place was a sleek black digital keypad with a glowing blue touchscreen, a smart lock. I stood there staring at the blue numbers. I did not know the code. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Jasmine's birthday. The lock beeped angrily and flashed red. I tried Coretta's birthday. Access denied. I was locked out. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They had not just taken my money, they had secured the perimeter. I looked at the front window. The curtains were drawn tight. I walked around the side of the house, slipping in the mud. I felt pathetic. I was a man of dignity. I was a retired engineer, and here I was prowling around my own home like a common thief. I tried the back door, locked. I tried the kitchen window, locked. My panic began to rise. I needed to get inside. I needed proof. Then I remembered the basement. Around the back, behind the hydrangea bushes Coretta had planted, there was a small hopper window that led to the laundry room. The latch had been broken for years. I kept meaning to fix it, but never got around to it. Today, that procrastination was my salvation. I got down on my hands and knees in the mud. The pain in my arthritic joints was excruciating. I gritted my teeth and pushed against the glass. It groaned, but it moved. I pushed harder. It swung open. I had to slide feet first into the dark abyss of my own basement. My suit jacket caught on the latch and I heard the expensive fabric tear. I landed on a pile of dirty laundry with a heavy thud. I lay there for a moment in the dark, breathing in the smell of detergent and mildew. I was inside, but I had left my dignity outside in the mud. I pulled myself up and navigated the stairs by memory. I knew every creak of these wooden steps. I knew which floorboard to avoid on the third step so I would not make a sound. I emerged into the kitchen. It was spotless, too spotless. It looked like a showroom, not a home. I did not stop. I moved through the living room past the photos of Jasmine on the mantel and headed straight for the study. This room used to be my sanctuary. It was where I drafted my blueprints. It was where I read my books. Now it was Brent's office. The air smelled of his expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke. I hated it. I went to the large mahogany desk. It was locked. Of course it was locked. But Brent was arrogant. He was the kind of man who thought he was smarter than everyone else, so he got sloppy. I felt under the desk drawer. Nothing. I checked the bookshelf. I pulled out a few books. Nothing. I scanned the room. My eyes landed on the trash can in the corner. It was empty except for a few shredded pieces of paper. I ignored it. I looked at the printer. There was a tray of paper. I lifted the stack of blank paper. Underneath it was a single manila folder. My heart started pounding in my ears. I opened it. The first page was a medical evaluation form. The patient name was Emmett Clay. The date was 6 months ago. I scanned the diagnosis. Advanced dementia, Alzheimer type. Patient exhibits aggressive behavior, paranoia, and inability to manage personal finances. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. 6 months ago, I was consulting on a bridge project in the city. 6 months ago, I was perfectly fine. I looked at the doctor's signature at the bottom. Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never met a Dr. Thorne in my life. I flipped the page. There was a log of incidents. Violent outburst at grocery store. Accused neighbor of stealing. Attempted to set fire to kitchen. I read the list of lies and my hands began to shake violently. These things never happened. Not once. This was fiction. This was a script written to destroy me. I flipped to the next section, to the It was a petition for emergency guardianship signed by a judge. The reason listed was immediate danger to self and others. Attached to it was a contract for the sale of the house. The closing date was tomorrow. The price was listed as $1.2 million. But the payout instructions were not to my account. They were to a holding company in the Cayman Islands called Jade Ventures. Jade. Jasmine. I felt a scream rising in my throat. This was not just theft. This was murder. They were killing my identity so they could feast on the corpse of my life's work. They had painted me as a monster to the courts so no one would listen when I cried for help. I looked at the papers and I saw the precision of the engineering. It was a perfectly constructed trap, and I was the rat. I wanted to tear the room apart. I wanted to smash the computer and flip the desk. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered, but I froze. Headlights swept across the wall. The sound of a luxury engine purred in the driveway. They were home. I shoved the folder back under the paper stack. No, that was too obvious. I took the folder. I folded it in half and jammed it into the waistband of my trousers, covering it with my shirt. I looked around wildly. There was nowhere to go. If I tried to run out the back, they would see me. If I went to the basement, I would be trapped. I heard the front door beep. The digital lock disengaged with a cheerful chime. Voices drifted into the hallway. I did the only thing I could do. I opened the door to the coat closet in the corner of the study and squeezed myself inside. It was tight. The space was filled with Brent's winter coats and Jasmine's long trenches. I pulled the door shut just as the study door opened. I held my breath. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound of my own terror. Through the slats of the closet door, I could see slivers of light. Brent walked in. I could smell the champagne on him from here. He sounded happy. He was humming a tune. Then Jasmine walked in. Her voice was different now. The laughter I had seen at the restaurant was gone. It was replaced by a whine that made my skin crawl. "Brent, I cannot do this anymore," she said. Her voice was high and tight. "Did you see the way he looked at the window? What if he saw us? What if he knows?" Brent chuckled. The sound was low and dismissive. "He does not know anything, Jazz. He is confused. He is probably wandering around downtown looking for a payphone. By tomorrow noon, he will be in the secure unit at Sunny Hills and we will be on a plane to Cabo. Relax, baby. We earned this." Jasmine sighed. I heard the sound of her dropping her purse on the desk. "I know, but I feel sick. He is still my dad. I mean, the acting is exhausting. Having to pretend I care about his stupid stories. Having to pretend I am sad about Mom. It is draining, Brent. I just want it to be over." I stood there in the dark, surrounded by their expensive coats, and felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. The theft of the house was painful. The lies about my sanity were infuriating. But this was the blade that severed the soul. My daughter. The girl I carried on my shoulders. The girl I sat up with when she was sick. She was not a victim of Brent's manipulation. She was not being forced. She was an actress. She was complaining about the effort it took to love me. She viewed my grief for her mother as an annoyance. I closed my eyes tight. Tears squeezed out hot and fast. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. I realized then that Emmett, the father, had to die in this closet. There was no room for him anymore. The man who would step out of this darkness had to be something else. He had to be cold. He had to be hard. He had to be exactly what they accused him of being. Dangerous. I spent the night sitting in the stiff wingback chair in the guest bedroom, watching the digital clock on the nightstand change numbers. I did not sleep. Sleep is for the innocent, and I was no longer innocent. I was a man who had seen the machinery of his own destruction. When the sun began to bleed through the sheer curtains, painting the room in a pale gray light, I stood up. My joints popped. My suit was ruined stiff with dried mud and rain, but I did not change. I needed to look exactly like the wreckage they expected to find. I walked down the hallway. The house was quiet, but it was not peaceful. It held the silence of a held breath before a scream. I could smell brewing coffee and the scent of frying bacon. It was a domestic smell that made my stomach churn. I walked into the kitchen. Brent was standing by the island kitchen counter reading the morning news on his tablet. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing his expensive watch. He looked the picture of success. He looked like the man I had trusted with my daughter's hand. When he heard my footsteps, he turned. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He smiled. It was a slow, pitying smile that did not reach his eyes. He set down his coffee mug and walked toward me with his hands out, palms up, as if he were approaching a frightened animal. "Good morning, Pops. Look who finally decided to join the land of the living." His voice was an octave higher than normal. It was a sing-song tone, the kind of voice you use for a toddler who has just learned to tie his shoes or a dog that you are trying to coax into a crate. It was a voice designed to strip away manhood. He did not speak to me like a father-in-law. He did not speak to me like an elder. He spoke to me like a broken thing that needed to be managed. "We were so worried about you last night. You gave us quite a scare. Did you have a little adventure in the rain?" He reached out and picked a piece of dried leaf from my shoulder, flicking it onto the floor. The gesture was casual, but it burned my skin like acid. He was touching me without permission. He was invading my space because he believed I no longer had any rights to personal space. Jasmine is still sleeping. Poor girl. She cried herself to sleep worrying about her daddy. "You know how sensitive she is. We really cannot keep doing this, Pops. It is not fair to her." He shook his head, looking at me with false sadness. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. I had heard them. I had heard her complaints in the study. I knew she was not crying for me. She was crying for herself. But Brent played the role of the protective husband perfectly. He was framing my existence as a burden on his wife, effectively weaponizing my love for my daughter against me. He was telling me that my very presence was hurting the person I loved most. It was psychological warfare wrapped in a soft voice. I felt the rage rising in my chest. It was a hot, physical pressure behind my sternum. I wanted to grab him by the throat. I wanted to slam his head into the granite countertop and scream that I knew about the sale and the fake doctors and the stolen money. My hands balled into fists at my sides. The muscles in my forearms tightened. I took a breath, ready to unleash the fury of a lifetime. I was going to tell him that Emmett Clay was not a man to be trifled with. I was going to demand he leave my house immediately. Then I heard Tavon's voice in my head. "Do not be a father. Be a soldier. If I exploded now, I would lose. If I showed him my anger, he would use it. He would call the police. He would say I was violent. He would show them my fists and my shouting as proof of the dementia diagnosis he had bought and paid for. He would win. I had to bury the engineer. I had to bury the man of logic. I had to become the character he had written for me. I forced my hands to unclench. It took every ounce of will I possessed. I let my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting my jaw go slack. I widened my eyes, giving them a vacant, glassy stare. I looked past Brent, focusing on the refrigerator door. "Where is Coretta?" I asked the question softly. My voice rasped. It was not entirely acting. The grief was always there, sitting just below the surface. Bringing it up now felt like a violation of her memory, but I had no other shield. Brent stopped. He blinked. For a second, the baby talk mask slipped, and I saw a flash of genuine annoyance. He hated when I talked about her. But he recovered quickly. He sighed a long, exaggerated exhale of patience. "Pops, we talked about this. Coretta is gone. She passed away 3 years ago. Remember?" I shook my head slowly, shuffling my feet on the tile floor. I looked down at my muddy shoes. "No. She said she was making pancakes. It is Saturday. We always have pancakes on Saturday." I looked up at him, injecting a note of panic into my voice. A pleading note. "Did she go to the store? I need to tell her to get the maple syrup. The real kind, not the cheap stuff." I watched Brent's face closely. I saw the tension leave his shoulders. He relaxed. He bought it. He believed that I was lost in time. He believed that his gaslighting had worked so well that my brain had finally snapped. A look of satisfaction settled over his features. It was a sickening look. It was the look of a predator realizing the prey has a broken leg. He walked over to the cabinet and pulled down a small orange prescription bottle. I recognized it. It was the bottle from the fake doctor. The label said, risperidone, an antipsychotic, a chemical restraint. He shook 2 pills into his palm. "It is okay, Pops. Coretta will be back soon. But first you need to take your vitamins. They will help you think clearly so you can welcome her when she gets home." He held the pills out to me. "Open up." The command was simple, but the implication was heavy. He was the master. I was the subject. I looked at the small white tablets. I knew what they were. I had looked them up on my phone in the closet last night. They caused sedation, confusion, and muscle weakness. If I took them, I would be a zombie. I would be exactly pliable enough to be shoved into a van and driven to an institution. I hesitated. Come on, Pops. Do it for Jasmine. You do not want to upset her again, do you? I opened my mouth. He placed the pills on my tongue. His fingers tasted of soap and betrayal. He handed me a glass of water. Drink. I took a sip of water. I let the liquid wash over my tongue. I used my tongue to slide the pills to the side, tucking them deep into the pocket between my gum and my cheek. It was a trick I had seen in movies, a trick I never thought I would have to use in my own kitchen. I swallowed the water, making a loud gulping sound. I closed my mouth and gave a small shudder. Good boy. He actually said it. Good boy. He patted my shoulder. He looked at me with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He thought the drugs were already dissolving into my system. He thought the chemical chains were wrapping around my mind. He turned back to his coffee, his arrogance radiating off him like heat. Why do you not go sit in the living room, Pops? I will put on the cartoons for you. We have a big day today. A very big day. I nodded mutely. I turned and shuffled out of the kitchen, dragging my feet. As soon as I was out of his line of sight, I reached into my mouth and spat the 2 white pills into my handkerchief. I crushed them between my fingers until they were powder and shoved the handkerchief deep into my pocket. I looked back toward the kitchen. Brent was whistling. He was happy. He thought he had won. He thought the war was over. He had no idea that while he was playing checkers, I was setting the board for chess. And the first move had just been made. I slipped out the back door while the water was still running in the upstairs bathroom. Brent was taking his morning shower and Jasmine was likely applying her makeup in the master suite. I moved through the garden with the stealth of a man half my age, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, focused rage. I climbed over the low wooden fence that separated my yard from the alleyway, ignoring the sharp pain in my knee. I walked 4 blocks to Lincoln Park. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp and smelling of wet earth and pine needles. It was a smell that reminded me of freedom. I found Tavon sitting on a bench near the empty playground. He was watching his son sleep in a stroller covered by a plastic rain shield. When Tavon looked up at me, I saw the exhaustion etched into his young face, but I also saw a fierce determination that mirrored my own. I sat down next to him. We did not speak for a long moment. We just sat there, 2 men from different generations, united by the wreckage of our lives. I asked him about his wife. I needed to know the man I was trusting with my life. Tavon looked at his son and told me she died 2 years ago. It was ovarian cancer. He said the medical bills wiped out their savings, and then the grief wiped out his ability to work full-time. That was when Brent swept in like a vulture. Brent promised him an affordable apartment, a fresh start. But it was a trap. Tavon told me that losing his wife broke his heart, but losing his home to a scam artist broke his spirit. He looked at me with tears brimming in his eyes and said he saw the same look in my eyes that he saw in the mirror. It was the look of a man who had loved deeply and been punished for it. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I told him about Coretta. I told him how she used to make sweet potato pie on Sundays, and how she could hum a tune that would calm any storm. I told him that I was fighting not just for my house, but for the memory of the woman who made that house a home. In that quiet park, amidst the chirping birds and the distant sound of city traffic, a bond was forged. It was stronger than blood. It was a covenant between 2 soldiers who had nothing left to lose. Tavon reached into the deep pocket of his mechanic jacket and pulled out a small object. It looked like a black button no larger than a dime. He pressed it into my hand. He told me it was a high-fidelity recording device. He said he used to use it when he worked at the auto shop to record engine noises for diagnostics. It had a 12-hour battery life and could pick up a whisper from across the room. He told me to sew it into the lining of my suit jacket or tape it under the collar of my shirt. He said, "Do not let them see it, and do not let the battery die." I closed my fingers around the cold plastic. It felt like a weapon. I gave him the name I had found in the file, Dr. Eris Thorne. I told him to find out everything. I wanted to know where he went to school. I wanted to know if he even had a medical license. I wanted to know how much Brent paid him. Tavon nodded. He took out a cracked smartphone and typed the name into his notes. He told me he still had friends from his old life. He knew a guy who worked in billing at the city hospital and another who was a paralegal before he got laid off. He said he would dig until he hit bedrock. He looked me in the eye and told me that by tomorrow morning we would know what Dr. Thorne ate for breakfast. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled $40 I had left. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. I tried to give it to him for food for the boy. Tavon pushed my hand away. He said, "We are partners now, Emmett. Partners do not pay each other. We pay the enemy back." He stood up and adjusted the blanket over his son. He told me to go back. He said I needed to play the part. He said I needed to let them think they were winning so they would get careless. He told me to be the confused old man they wanted me to be. I watched him walk away, pushing the stroller down the cracked sidewalk. He walked with a limp and his clothes were threadbare, but he walked with dignity. I realized then that Brent had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was crushing a helpless old man and a homeless bum. He did not know he was creating a two-headed monster that would devour his entire world. I walked back to the neighborhood, taking the long way around. I did not go back into the house. I needed a stage for my performance. I walked to the end of the block and stood on the corner near the stop sign. I unbuttoned my shirt collar and messed up my hair. I rubbed dirt on my expensive slacks. I stood there staring at the street sign, looking lost and bewildered. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, I saw Brent's silver Mercedes coming down the street. He slowed down as he approached the house. Then he saw me. He slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt. The passenger door flew open and Jasmine stepped out. This was the moment. This was the test. I wanted her to run to me. I wanted her to grab my face and ask if I was okay. I wanted to see fear in her eyes. Fear for my safety, not for her inconvenience. I started to tremble, feigning fear. Jasmine marched toward me. She was wearing her yoga clothes and holding a green smoothie. She did not run. She stomped. She did not look worried. She looked furious. She grabbed my arm with a grip that pinched my skin. She hissed at me, asking what the hell I was doing out here. She said the neighbors were watching. She said I was embarrassing her. I looked at her face. It was twisted in a snarl of annoyance. I stammered. I told her I was looking for the bus stop. I told her I wanted to go to work. I told her the bridge needed me. It was a line I came up with on the spot, a call to my past life. Jasmine rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at her confused elderly father. She pulled me toward the car roughly. She told me I was retired. She told me I was sick. She said she could not believe I wandered off when she had so much to do today. She muttered under her breath that I was ruining her Saturday. I got into the back seat of the car. Brent turned around from the driver's seat. He was wearing sunglasses. He shook his head and said, "See, this is why we need professional help, Jess. We cannot watch him 24/7. Jasmine slammed the car door shut and sighed loud and long. She looked at Brent and said, "I know, baby, I know. You are right as always." I sat in the back seat and looked at the back of her head. I looked at the way she sipped her smoothie while her father sat behind her covered in dirt and supposedly out of his mind. Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet sound, like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest. It was the sound of the last thread of affection severing. I had spent the last 24 hours making excuses for her. I had told myself she was weak. I had told myself she was manipulated. But this was not manipulation. This was character. She was selfish. She was cruel. And she was no longer my daughter. She was just another obstacle in my path. I leaned my head against the cold window and let a single tear slide down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of mourning for the girl she used to be. That girl was dead. And the woman sitting in the front seat was about to learn that you never declare war on a man who has built bridges that can withstand hurricanes. I touched the small, hard button of the recorder hidden in my pocket. The red light was not visible, but I knew it was there. Recording every insult, recording every lie, recording the prelude to their destruction. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m, shattering the fragile silence of the house. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the dust motes dancing in a shaft of sunlight. I had been positioned there by Brent like a piece of furniture waiting to be appraised. I heard the heavy tread of footsteps in the hallway, and then Brent's voice loud and performative greeting the visitor. He called him Dr. Thorne. The name sounded weighty and respectable. It commanded authority. But when the man walked into the living room, the illusion shattered instantly for anyone paying attention. I was paying attention. Dr. Eris Thorne was a short man with a nervous energy that made him twitch. He wore a white coat that was clearly bought from a costume shop. It was too large at the shoulders, and the fabric was thin polyester, not the heavy cotton of a professional medical garment. Underneath, he wore a shirt that was unbuttoned, one too many buttons at the top, revealing a gold chain nestled in a thicket of chest hair. He did not smell like antiseptic or latex. He smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap mints, the kind used to mask the scent of bourbon. He carried a leather satchel that looked more suited for a gym than a medical practice. Brent ushered him in with a flourish. "Pops, this is Dr. Thorne. He is a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline. He is here to help us understand what is happening to you." Thorne looked at me. His eyes were small and dark, moving constantly around the room, assessing the value of the paintings and the furniture rather than the patient. He grinned, revealing teeth that had seen too much coffee. "Well, hello there, Mr. Clay. Brent tells me we have been having some trouble distinguishing reality from fantasy." He walked over to me and placed his bag on the coffee table without asking. He did not wash his hands. He did not put on gloves. He simply pulled up a chair and sat so close that his knees knocked against mine. It was an invasion of space designed to intimidate. He pulled a pen light from his pocket and flashed it directly into my eyes without warning. I flinched. "Reflexes are a bit slow," he murmured to Brent, who was hovering behind the sofa like a vulture. "Typical for this stage of degeneration." Thorne clicked the light off and leaned back, crossing his legs. He looked at me with a smirk that he did not bother to hide. "Let us play a little game, Mr. Clay. Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at him. I wanted to tell him it was the year he was going to go to federal prison. I wanted to tell him that his stethoscope was hanging backwards around his neck. But I remembered my role. I let my jaw hang loose. I blinked slowly as if processing the question through a thick fog. "It is 1998, I whispered. "Coretta is making dinner." Thorne laughed. It was a barking sound devoid of any empathy. He looked at Brent and shook his head. 1998. That is almost 30 years ago. The temporal displacement is severe. He turned back to me. "Who is the President of the United States, Mr. Clay?" I looked down at my hands, twisting the fabric of my trousers. I pretended to struggle. I pretended to search a mind that was supposedly empty. I muttered a name from the history books. "Eisenhower." Thorne slapped his thigh. "Eisenhower. Did you hear that, Brent? He thinks we are in the 50s. This is worse than you described. The cognitive mapping is completely eroded. He is basically a shell." He reached out and tapped my forehead with his index finger. It was a demeaning gesture, a gesture you would use on a melon to check for ripeness. "Hello. Anybody home?" I sat there and took it. I let him insult my intelligence. I let him treat me like a prop in his con game. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to break his finger. I was an engineer. I could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a bridge in my head. I could recite the periodic table backwards, and this 2-bit hustler was tapping on my skull like it was hollow. But I did not move. I stared past him, focusing on the red light of the smoke detector on the ceiling, letting my eyes glaze over. I was waiting for the opening. I was waiting for the moment his arrogance would outweigh his caution. Thorne turned to his bag and pulled out a clipboard. He started checking boxes rapidly without even asking me questions. Severe dementia check, paranoia check, inability to care for self check. He was filling out my death warrant with a ballpoint pen. "Well, I think we have seen enough here," he said, capping the pen with a decisive click. "The diagnosis is confirmed. Mr. Clay is a danger to himself. He requires immediate placement in a secure facility. I can sign the involuntary commitment papers right now." This was it, the moment of truth. I needed him to say it. I needed him to connect the medical diagnosis to the financial transaction. I needed the smoking gun. I cleared my throat. It was a dry, rasping sound. I looked up at Thorne with wide, fearful eyes. "Doctor," I said, my voice trembling, "is the hospital expensive? I do not have any money. I do not want to be a burden to Brent." Thorne paused. He looked at me, and for a second I thought he might feel a pang of guilt. But I was wrong. He looked at me with greed. He glanced at Brent and then back at me. His guard was down. He thought I was a senile old man worried about pennies. "Do not you worry about the money," old-timer Thorne said, leaning in conspiratorially. "You are a very rich man, or at least you used to be." He winked at Brent. I pressed on. I needed more. I needed specifics. "But the house." I stammered. "Coretta loved this house. Will we have to sell it to pay you?" Thorne chuckled. He began packing his bag. "The house is taking care of Mr. Clay. In fact, it is the golden goose. Once the sale goes through tomorrow morning, there will be plenty of money for everyone. I widen my eyes further, feigning confusion. Plenty for everyone. So, you get paid from the house too? Brent stepped forward, looking slightly uneasy. Pops, do not worry about the details. But Thorne waved him off. He was enjoying this too much. He was enjoying taunting the helpless. Of course I get paid, Mr. Clay, Thorne said with a sneer. Professional services are not free, and neither is my signature. $1 million sale has enough slices of pie for the doctor, the son-in-law, and the broker. You are just paying your dues. He said it. He admitted to the kickback. He admitted that his signature was for sale. He linked the medical diagnosis directly to the house sale. It was all there. The recording device taped inside my shirt pocket was humming against my chest. It was capturing every syllable of his confession. Thorne stood up and smoothed down his cheap coat. He turned to Brent and clapped him on the shoulder. You are all set, my friend. I will drop the signed forms at the courthouse within the hour. By the time you close the deal tomorrow, he will be legally incapacitated. The bank will have to unlock the funds. Brent let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a genuine smile of relief. You are a lifesaver, heiress. I mean it. I was worried he might snap out of it or try to call a lawyer. Thorne laughed again, louder this time. A lawyer. Look at him. He thinks Eisenhower is president. No lawyer would take his case. He is a vegetable, Brent. A walking, talking vegetable. They both looked at me. I was sitting slumped in the chair, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I looked small. I looked defeated. I looked like exactly what they described. Brent walked over to the liquor cabinet. Let us have a drink to celebrate. The hard part is over. He poured 2 glasses of scotch. He did not offer me one. He handed a glass to Thorne. To the sale, Brent said, raising his glass. To the Golden Goose, Thorne replied, clinking his glass against Brent's. They drank. They laughed. They began talking about what they would do with the money. Thorne talked about paying off his bookie. Brent talked about a trip to Vegas. They discussed the transaction fee. They discussed how they would dump me at Sunny Hills and forget I ever existed. I sat there and listened to them carve up my life. I watched them toast to my destruction. My hand was in my pocket holding the small black recorder. My thumb was resting on the save button. I did not shake. I did not cry. A cold calm had settled over me. It was the calm of a bridge standing firm against a raging river. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought I was the past. They had no idea that I was the architect of their future, and their future was going to be a very small, concrete cell. I watched Thorne finish his drink and wipe his mouth with the back of his hand. All right, I have to run, Thorne said, grabbing his bag. See you on the other side of being rich, buddy. He walked past me without a glance. He did not say goodbye. To him, I was already gone. I was just an obstacle that had been removed. Brent walked him to the door. I heard them laughing in the hallway. I heard the front door open and close. I sat alone in the living room. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of evidence. I slowly pulled the recorder out of my pocket. The red light was still blinking. I pressed stop. The tiny machine beeped once. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. I slipped the recorder into my sock, tucking it deep against my ankle. I leaned my head back against the chair and closed my eyes. Let them laugh. Let them celebrate. Tomorrow the bill would come due, and I would be the one collecting. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the living room floor when the dynamic in the house shifted. It was a subtle change at first, like the drop in pressure before a tornado touches down. I was sitting in my usual spot by the window, pretending to watch the birds, but in reality I was watching the reflection of the room in the glass. Brent had been upstairs in the attic for the better part of an hour. He told Jasmine he was looking for old tax records, but I knew better. He was scavenging. He was digging through the dusty boxes of my past, looking for anything else he could monetize before he discarded me. I heard his heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. They were fast and eager. He burst into the living room, and the look on his face made my blood run cold. It was not the look of disdain he usually wore when addressing me. It was a look of hungry excitement. He was holding a yellowed piece of paper in his hand. It was a deed. I recognized it immediately. It was the deed to a 10-acre plot of land in the marshlands on the edge of the county. My grandfather had bought it for pennies in the 1940s, hoping to farm it, but the soil was too salty. For decades it had been nothing but a patch of sawgrass and mosquitoes. I had kept the deed in an old cigar box purely for sentimental reasons. It was a reminder of where I came from. But Brent did not care about sentiment. He cared about zoning. He walked straight over to me and knelt down by my chair. This was new. Usually he stood over me asserting his dominance. Now he was at eye level. He was smiling so wide it looked painful. "Pops," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. "You never told me about the property in West Creek." I blinked slowly, acting the part. I told him it was just swamp. I told him it was worthless. Brent laughed. He patted my knee. "Oh, it is not worthless, Pops. I just checked the municipal planning database. The city just approved a new highway bypass right through that sector. Commercial developers are buying up everything in that zip code. This piece of paper is a lottery ticket." I saw the greed dancing in his eyes. He was already spending the money in his head. He was calculating the commission. He was imagining the sports car he would buy. He did not see a legacy. He saw a liquidation. He stood up and rubbed his hands together. "Jasmine," he called out toward the kitchen. "Honey, cancel the pizza order. We are having steaks tonight. The good ones from the butcher. We are celebrating." I watched him pace around the room. The transformation was terrifying. An hour ago, he was treating me like a vegetable. Now he was treating me like a partner. But I knew the truth. I was not a partner. I was the goose that he needed to squeeze one last golden egg out of before he chopped off its head. He came back to me and adjusted the blanket on my lap. "You are going to be so comfortable, Pops," he said. "With the money from the house and now this land, we can get you into the VIP wing at Sunny Hills. Private room. Ocean view. You deserve the best." He was lying. There was no VIP wing. There was only the state-funded ward he had already filled out the paperwork for. He wanted the land money for himself. He wanted to strip me of every asset I had so that when I finally disappeared, there would be nothing left for anyone to ask questions about. I nodded weakly and looked out the window. I let him think I was placated. I let him think I was a senile old man happy to be useful. But inside my chest, my heart was beating a war drum. He had found the bait. Now I just had to make sure he swallowed the hook. Dinner was a grotesque pantomime of a happy family. Brent had set the dining room table with the fine china Coretta used to save for Thanksgiving. He had lit candles. He had even put on jazz music in the background. It was a scene straight out of a magazine, but the undercurrent was toxic. Jasmine sat across from me picking at her salad. She would not meet my eyes. She knew this sudden kindness was fake. She knew we were acting out a play written by her husband's avarice, but she said nothing. She drank her wine and let the silence stretch. Brent, on the other hand, could not stop talking. He cut my steak for me into tiny, bite-sized pieces as if I were a toddler. He poured me a glass of sparkling cider instead of wine. "You need to keep a clear head tonight, Pops," he said with a wink. "We have some important business to discuss." He ate with gusto, devouring the meat with the hunger of a man who believes he has conquered the world. He talked about the future. He talked about investment portfolios and diversified assets. He used big words trying to sound sophisticated, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. He was in debt. I knew it. Tavon had told me about the gambling debts. This land sale was not just for a luxury trip. It was to save his kneecaps from loan sharks. When the plates were cleared, Brent brought out the document. He placed it on the table in front of me with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. It was a power of attorney addendum specifically granting him the right to liquidate real estate assets, including the West Creek property. He placed a heavy fountain pen next to it. The gold accents on the pen gleamed in the candlelight. "All right, Pops," Brent said, his voice lowering to a soothing murmur. "This is just a formality. Since you are not feeling well lately, this just lets me handle the boring paperwork for the land sale. We want to get that money into your retirement account as fast as possible, right?" I looked at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes, not because I could not read them, but because I was fighting the urge to tear the paper to shreds. This was the final nail. If I signed this, I was handing over the last piece of my history. I looked at Jasmine. "Jas," I asked softly, "is this okay? Should I sign this?" For a second I saw her struggle. I saw her hand tremble around the stem of her wine glass. She looked at Brent. He was staring at her with a hard, warning look. The mask of the loving husband had slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing the tyrant underneath. "It is for the best, Dad," she whispered, looking down at the tablecloth. "Brent knows what he is doing. Just sign it so we can eat dessert." She chose him. Again. I sighed. A long, rattling sound that filled the room. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I held it awkwardly, gripping it like a child learning to write. Brent leaned in closer. I could smell the steak sauce on his breath. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. "Right there, Pops," he pointed to the line at the bottom. "Just your name, Emmett Clay." I lowered the pen to the paper. I hesitated. I let the tip of the pen hover over the signature line, ink bleeding into the white fiber. I closed my eyes as if trying to summon a memory. "I forget," I mumbled. "How do I spell it?" Brent let out a small, frustrated breath, but quickly covered it with a laugh. "E-M-M-E-T-T. Come on, Pops. You can do it." I opened my eyes. I started to write. But I did not write Emmett Clay, not the way I had written it on thousands of blueprints and bank checks. I let my hand shake. I made the E look like a jagged scratch. I looped the M so it looked more like a W. And then for the last name, I did not write Clay. I wrote a collection of loops and lines that vaguely resembled the shape of my name. But if you looked closely, if you were a forensic handwriting expert, you would see something else. You would see the letters T-R-A-P hidden in the chaotic scrawl. I lifted the pen. The signature was a mess. It looked like the scratching of a man who had lost all motor control. "Is that good?" I asked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Brent snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. He stared at it. For a heartbeat, I thought he would notice. I thought he would see that it was illegible, that it would never stand up in a court of law if challenged by a competent lawyer. But his greed blinded him. He saw ink on the line, and that was all that mattered. "Perfect, Pops," he said, grinning. "Absolutely perfect." He folded the paper and shoved it into his breast pocket, patting it triumphantly. "You did good today, old man. You really did good." He stood up and went to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself another generous glass of scotch. He did not offer me any dessert. The performance was over. The contract was signed. I was no longer needed. I sat there at the table, staring at the empty space where the document had been. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. He thought he had just secured his fortune. He did not realize he had just handed me the weapon that would destroy him. That signature was invalid. I had been declared mentally incompetent by his own fake doctor just hours ago. A person under duress and with a medical diagnosis of severe dementia cannot legally sign a contract. By forcing me to sign this after paying a doctor to say I was crazy, he had just created irrefutable proof of fraud and elder abuse. I looked at my hand. The ink stain on my finger looked like a bruise. I wiped it off on the napkin. The seed was planted. Tomorrow at the closing, when the lawyers looked at the documents, when Hattie Bloom walked into that room, everything would unravel, and I would be there to pull the thread. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table. "I am tired," I said. "I want to go to bed." Brent did not even look at me. He was texting on his phone, probably telling his bookie the money was on the way. "Go ahead, Pops," he said dismissively. "Big day tomorrow. Get some rest." I walked toward the stairs. I passed Jasmine. She was still staring into her wine glass. She looked small and defeated. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the way she told me to sign. I remembered the betrayal. I kept walking. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I counted the steps. 1, 2, 3. Each step was a countdown. The time for mercy was over. The time for justice had begun. I went into my room and closed the door. I did not turn on the light. I sat on the edge of the bed and checked the recorder in my sock. It was still running. It had caught everything. The coercion, the manipulation, the fraud. I lay back on the pillows and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. The digital clock on the dashboard of Tavon's rusted sedan read 2 in the morning as we pulled up to a nondescript brick building in the financial district. The rain had started again, a fine mist that made the streetlights bloom like halos. I was tired. My bones ached from sleeping in a chair, and my heart ached from the betrayal I had swallowed at dinner. But my mind was sharp. Tavon turned off the engine. He looked at me and told me that the woman inside was not cheap and she was not nice, but she was the best. He said she had sued the city twice and won. He said she ate corrupt landlords for breakfast. I nodded. I did not need nice. I needed nuclear. We took the elevator to the 14th floor. The door opened directly into a reception area that smelled of leather and old paper. There was no receptionist at this hour, only a single light burning in the office at the end of the hall. We walked toward it. The woman sitting behind the massive oak desk did not look up when we entered. She was reading a file with a magnifying glass, her silver hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. She was Hattie Bloom. She wore a tailored black suit that looked like armor, and her face was a landscape of sharp angles and intelligent lines. She looked like a hawk perched on a ledge waiting for a mouse to make a mistake. She finally looked up. Her eyes were gray and cold. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer me a seat. She simply held out her hand. Tavon stepped forward and placed the small black recorder into her palm. She placed it on the desk and pressed play. We stood in silence for 20 minutes listening to the voices of my destruction. We heard Brent calling me a vegetable. We heard Dr. Thorne admitting to the kickback. We heard the laughter. We heard the sound of the Scotch glasses clinking. Hattie did not flinch. She did not gasp. She sat as still as a statue, her face betraying absolutely nothing. When the tape ended, she pressed stop with a single manicured finger. She looked at me for a long time. It was an uncomfortable scrutiny. She was measuring me. She was deciding if I was a victim or a warrior. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low and scratchy, like dry leaves blowing over concrete. She asked me what I wanted. She asked if I wanted my house back or if I wanted my life back. I told her I wanted them to pay. I told her I wanted them to feel the same helplessness they had forced upon me. Hattie leaned back in her chair and a small, terrifying smile touched her lips. She told me that most lawyers look for a settlement. They look for a way to make the bad guys apologize and write a check. She said she did not operate that way. She said she did not believe in pruning the weeds. She believed in salting the earth so nothing ever grew there again. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "We do not need to win, Mr. Clay. We need to destroy them. We need to strip them of their licenses, their freedom, and their arrogance. We need to leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a federal indictment." She opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. She told me to sit down. The War Council had begun. Hattie Bloom picked up a fountain pen and began to draw a diagram on the paper. She drew a circle and wrote Brent in the middle. Then she drew lines radiating out to Thorne, the bank, and the house. She tapped the pen on the paper, creating a rhythmic thumping sound. She explained the legal landscape to me with the precision of a surgeon explaining a tumor. She said that right now Brent was winning. He had a signed power of attorney even if it was obtained by fraud. He had a medical diagnosis even if it was fake. If we went to the police right now, they would say it was a civil matter. They would say it was a family dispute. Brent would get a slap on the wrist. He might lose his real estate license for a few months, but he would walk away. He would claim he was acting in my best interest and that Dr. Thorne made a mistake. She looked at me and told me that was not good enough. She said we needed a felony. We needed a crime so undeniable that no judge could look away. She pointed to the recording device. "This is good," she said, "but it is hearsay. It is inadmissible without corroboration. We need the act. We need the transaction." She explained the loophole that would become our noose for Brent. She said that for the crime of grand larceny and elder fraud to stick at a federal level, the money had to move. Brent had to actually sell the house. He had to wire the funds. He had to complete the theft. If we stopped him before the sale, it was just attempted fraud. Attempted fraud gets probation. Completed fraud gets 10 years in a federal penitentiary. She looked at the papers I had brought. She looked at the copy of the deed I had signed with the shaky hand. She laughed a short, dry bark of amusement. She said the signature was brilliant. She said writing trap in the signature line was a stroke of genius because a forensic handwriting analyst would testify that the signature was inconsistent with my historical signature, invalidating the document retroactively. But the real trap was the timing. She explained that if Brent sold the house acting as my guardian while I was secretly proven to be sane, he was committing perjury and bank fraud. Every document he signed at the closing table would be another nail in his coffin. But then she stopped. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at me with a rare expression of sympathy. She said there was a catch. There is always a catch. She said that to make this work, we had to let the sale go through. We had to let the closing happen. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the arms of the leather chair. I asked her what she meant. Hattie leaned forward. She spoke slowly, ensuring I understood every word. She said that tomorrow morning Brent was going to sell my house. He was going to sign the papers. He was going to hand over the keys, and I had to let him. I had to let him pack my things. I had to let him put me in the car. I had to let him drive me to the nursing home. I had to lose the house completely and legally for at least 24 hours. I stood up. I could not help it. The anger flared up again, hot and blinding. I told her no. I told her that house was not just wood and brick. It was Coretta. It was the pencil marks on the doorframe measuring Jasmine's height. It was the garden Coretta planted before she got sick. I told her I could not let strangers walk into my home and claim it. I told her I could not let Brent win even for a day. Hattie did not flinch. She waited for me to finish. Then she asked me a question that cut me to the bone. She asked if I wanted to keep the house and live in it with a daughter who hated me and a son-in-law who would try again next year. She asked if I wanted to sleep with one eye open for the rest of my life, wondering when they would poison my tea or push me down the stairs. She said Brent would not stop. If I stopped the sale tomorrow, he would find another way. The only way to be safe was to remove him from society. She stood up and walked around the desk. She stood in front of me. She was small, but she felt 10 feet tall. She told me that Coretta did not live in the house. She lived in me. She said that fighting for my dignity was the best way to honor my wife. She told me that sometimes you have to burn the village to save it. She said we were playing a long game. We were sacrificing a pawn to capture the king. I looked at Tavon. He was standing by the door holding his sleeping son. He nodded slowly. He understood sacrifice. He had lost everything and was still standing. I looked back at Hattie. I thought about the way Brent smiled when he fed me the pills. I thought about Jasmine rolling her eyes. I realized Hattie was right. The house was already gone. The home I knew had died the moment they decided to betray me. Now it was just a building, and I was willing to use it as the bait for the trap. I took a deep breath. I felt the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. I looked at Hattie and told her to do it. I told her I would get in the car. I told her I would go to the nursing home. But I made her promise me one thing. I made her promise that when the hammer came down, it would come down hard enough to shatter them. Hattie smiled again. This time it was a genuine smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found a partner in the hunt. She promised me. She told me to go home and get some sleep. She said that tomorrow was going to be the worst day of my life, but the day after that would be the first day of my new life. I walked out of that office into the rainy night. I felt empty, but I also felt light. I had handed the detonator to Hattie Bloom. All I had to do now was wait for the explosion. The rain did not stop. It drummed against the roof shingles with a relentless rhythm that sounded like 1,000 fingers tapping on a coffin lid. It was 3 a.m, and the house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum holding the ghosts of happier times. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind howl through the eaves. Sleep was impossible. My mind was an engine revving in neutral burning fuel, but going nowhere. I kept replaying the meeting with Hattie Bloom. I kept hearing her tell me that tomorrow I had to lose everything to win. I had to let them drive me out. I had to let them win. The logic was sound, but the heart is not a logical organ. It is a muscle that bleeds and aches, and right now my heart was heavy with a question that needed an answer. I needed to know if there was anything left of my little girl inside the woman sleeping down the hall. I needed to know if the corruption was absolute or if there was a sliver of soul still flickering in the dark. I heard a noise downstairs. It was the soft clinking of glass against granite. I sat up. My joints popped in protest, but I ignored the pain. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the cold hardwood floor against my bare feet. I did not put on my slippers. I walked out into the hallway. The door to the master bedroom was open a crack, and I could hear the heavy snoring of Brent. He slept the sleep of the wicked, untroubled by conscience or morality. But Jasmine was not there. The bed beside him was empty. I moved down the stairs, gripping the banister tight. The house was shadowed and gray, lit only by the street lamps filtering through the rain-streaked windows. I walked toward the kitchen. I saw her sitting at the island counter. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered in the gloom. She had a glass of red wine in one hand, and her head was resting in the other. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. I stopped in the doorway. I watched her for a moment. This was the child I had raised. This was the girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. This was the woman who had promised her dying mother she would take care of me. Seeing her weep sparked a flame of hope in my chest. Maybe she was regretting it. Maybe the guilt was eating her alive. Maybe if I gave her one last chance, she would take it. I stepped into the light. I did not shuffle. I did not act confused. I walked with the steady gait of a father coming to comfort his child. Jasmine. She jumped. Her hand knocked against the wine glass and red liquid sloshed onto the white marble counter looking like a fresh wound. She spun around on the stool, clutching her robe tight at her throat. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look like a tragic clown. "Dad, you scared me." "What are you doing up? Go back to bed." Her voice was sharp, but it lacked the usual venom. It was thin and brittle. I ignored her command. I walked over to the counter and pulled out the stool next to her. I sat down. I looked at the spilled wine. I looked at her trembling hands. I looked into her eyes. "I cannot sleep, Jazz. The rain is too loud. It reminds me of the night your mom died." "Do you remember? It was raining just like this." Jasmine looked away. She picked up a paper towel and started dabbing at the wine stain aggressively. Her movements were jerky. "I do not want to talk about Mom right now, Dad. Please, just go upstairs. Brent will be angry if he wakes up and finds you wandering around." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. My hand was rough and calloused from years of work. Her hand was soft and manicured. I stopped her scrubbing motion. I forced her to stop moving. I forced her to feel my touch. "Jasmine, look at me." She hesitated. Then slowly she lifted her head. Her eyes met mine. I saw fear there. I saw shame. But was there love? I spoke softly. I dropped the act completely. I spoke to her as Emmett Clay. "I know what is happening tomorrow, Jasmine. I know about the sale. I know about the nursing home." She went rigid. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Panic flared in her pupils. "I am not confused, Jazz. I feel fine. My mind is as sharp as it ever was. I know Brent is in trouble with money. I know he is pressuring you. But this house, this is our history. This is where you took your first steps. This is where we said goodbye to your mother." I squeezed her hand. I put everything I had into that grip. All my love, all my forgiveness, all my desperation. "Do not do this. Do not sell our home. Do not send me away. We can figure out the money. I have some savings left that Brent does not know about. We can fix this. Just tell him to stop. Tell him you want your father to stay. Please, Jazz. Choose me." For a long minute, silence hung in the kitchen like a heavy curtain. The only sound was the refrigerator humming and the rain beating against the glass. I watched her face. I saw the war being fought behind her eyes. I saw her look at my hand covering hers. I saw her lip quiver. Tears welled up in her eyes again and spilled over. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw my daughter. I saw the girl who loved me. She took a breath. She opened her mouth to speak. I leaned forward, waiting for the words of redemption. I was ready to forgive everything. I was ready to hug her and tell her we would fight Brent together. Then her eyes shifted. She looked past me. She looked toward the ceiling, toward the bedroom where Brent lay sleeping. And just like that, the light went out. The softness hardened. The fear of her husband outweighed the love for her father. She pulled her hand away from mine as if I had burned her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and sat up straighter. The mask slammed back into place. "Dad, you are talking nonsense again." The words were a physical blow. I recoiled. "Jasmine, I am not. I am telling you I am lucid." She shook her head violently. She stood up, grabbing her wine glass. She looked down at me with a cold, detached expression that was far worse than hatred. It was dismissal. "You are having an episode, Dad. You think you are fine, but you are not. Dr. Thorne explained this to us. He said you would have moments of clarity, but they are just hallucinations of wellness. You are sick. You are a danger to yourself." She was quoting the script. She was hiding behind the lie because the truth was too painful to look at. She was gaslighting herself as much as she was gaslighting me. I stood up. I looked at her. I gave her one last chance. "Jasmine, look me in the eye and tell me you believe that. Tell me you believe I am crazy." She looked me in the eye. She did not blink. "I believe you need help that I cannot give you. I believe selling this house is the only way to pay for your care. And I believe you need to go to sleep right now before you wake up my husband." My husband. Not Brent. My husband. She had drawn the line in the sand. She was on his side of the border. I was the enemy. I nodded slowly. The hope in my chest turned to ash. It was cold and gray and lifeless. I felt something break inside me, something that could never be repaired. The father in me died in that kitchen. The protector died. What remained was the engineer. the man who solved problems, and Jasmine Clay was no longer family. She was a structural failure. She was a crack in the foundation that had to be condemned. I did not argue. I did not plead. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped back. Okay, Jasmine, I understand. She looked relieved. She thought she had won. She thought she had managed the unruly patient. She took a sip of her wine and turned toward the sink. Good night, Dad. We have a big day tomorrow. I did not answer. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I walked through the dark hallway past the family photos hanging on the wall. I saw a picture of Jasmine at her graduation smiling with her arm around my neck. I did not feel warmth. I felt nothing. I walked up the stairs. 1, 2, 3. Each step took me further away from the life I used to know. I entered my bedroom and closed the door. I locked it. I walked over to the small nightstand where I kept my leather-bound journal. I sat down on the edge of the bed and turned on the small lamp. I opened the journal to the page where I listed my emergency contacts, the page where I listed the people who mattered. At the top of the list, written in my careful architectural script, was her name, Jasmine Clay. I took a black marker from the drawer. I uncapped it. The smell of the ink was sharp and chemical. I looked at the name. I remembered the day I wrote it. I remembered the day she was born. I remembered holding her tiny hand. I pressed the marker to the paper. I drew a single thick black line through her name. I did not scribble. I did not tear the paper. It was a clean, straight line. A line of finality. A line of severance. She made her choice. She chose the champagne and the lies. She chose the man who wanted to put me in a cage. She chose money over blood. I recapped the marker and set it down. I closed the book. I lay back on the bed and listened to the rain. It did not sound like a funeral march anymore. It sounded like a drum roll. It sounded like the rhythm of a coming war. They wanted to sell the house. Fine. Let them sell it. They wanted to put me in a home. Fine. Let them drive me there. They thought tomorrow was the end of the story. They were wrong. Tomorrow was just the opening scene of their nightmare, and I would be the director. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. I needed the rest. I had a busy day ahead of me. I had a trap to spring. The moving truck arrived at 8 in the morning with a grinding of gears that sounded like a prehistoric beast dying in my driveway. It was not a professional moving van from a reputable company. It was a jagged, rusted beast that smelled of diesel fumes and neglect, which was fitting because it was here to transport the wreckage of my life. I stood on the front porch wearing the same suit I had worn for 3 days. My shirt was wrinkled and my face was unshaven, but I stood tall. I watched as 2 burly men in stained coveralls jumped out of the cab. They did not look like movers. They looked like bouncers who had been hired to clear out a bar fight. Brent walked out of the house past me without a word. He was clapping his hands and barking orders. He told them to be quick. He told them that everything in the pile on the lawn was trash and everything in the boxes was to be taken to storage. He did not say please. He treated them like machinery. I looked at the lawn. My belongings were there. Not in boxes, not in crates, but in black plastic garbage bags. My clothes, my books, the drafting tools I had used to design the suspension bridge downtown. All of it was stuffed into trash bags like common refuse. Brent grabbed a bag that contained my winter coats and heaved it toward the truck. The bag split open. A heavy wool coat that Coretta had bought me spilled out into the mud. I stepped forward, my hand reaching out instinctively to save it. Brent stepped in front of me. He did not shove me, but he used his body to block my path. He looked at me with a mask of concern that was terrifying in its perfection. Pops, do not worry about that old junk. We are getting you all new things at the facility. You do not need heavy coats where you are going. It is climate controlled. He said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear. And they were listening. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was standing by her mailbox clutching her robe. Mr. Henderson was peering through his blinds. They saw a caring son-in-law helping a confused old man. They saw Brent pick up the muddy coat with a sigh of patience. They did not see the sneer on his face when his back was turned to them. They did not see him kick my photo album into the wet grass. To them, I was the tragedy, and he was the saint. I felt their pity washing over me from across the street, and it burned hotter than hatred. They thought I had lost my mind. They nodded at each other, confirming the rumors Brent had spread. Poor Emmett. He lost it after Coretta died. Thank God for that nice young man taking care of him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to the middle of the street and shout that I was sane and that I was being robbed in broad daylight. But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I let Brent guide me by the elbow toward the car. I let him treat me like a prisoner being transferred to maximum security. I shuffled my feet. I looked down. I played the part of the defeated man because I knew that the only way to win this war was to lose this battle. But as I walked past the pile of garbage bags, I felt a rage so cold and so sharp that I was surprised it did not freeze the rain falling around us. He was throwing away my history. He was erasing Emmett Clay from the face of the earth. I stood by the passenger door of Brent's luxury sedan while the movers continued their work. One of the men was moving differently than the others. While the first mover was tossing bags with careless aggression, the second man was moving with precision. He wore a blue cap pulled low over his eyes and a uniform that was slightly too large for his frame. He picked up a box marked specifically for the master bedroom. This was the box Brent kept his personal files in, the box that contained the original deed to the house and the fake medical records. Brent was distracted yelling at the driver about scratching the paint on the gate. The man in the blue cap walked past me. He did not stop. He did not wave. But as he passed within inches of where I stood, he tilted his head up just enough for me to see his eyes beneath the brim of the hat. It was Tavon. His eyes were clear and focused. He gave me the slightest nod, barely a twitch of his chin. It was a signal. It meant the switch was done. While Brent was eating his steak dinner last night, pretending to be the master of the universe, Tavon had infiltrated the garage where the boxes were staged. He had swapped the contents of the critical file box. The documents Brent thought he was sending to secure storage were actually blank sheets of paper and old newspapers. The real documents, the evidence of the fraud, the original deed, and the records of the offshore accounts were currently sitting in the trunk of Tavon's rusted sedan parked 3 blocks away. Tavon walked to the truck and loaded the decoy box. He moved with the efficiency of a soldier planting a bomb. He turned back and looked at me one last time. In that look, he communicated everything. He told me that the evidence was safe. He told me that Hattie Bloom was ready. He told me that I was not alone. I felt a surge of strength return to my legs. I was not a prisoner anymore. I was an operative. I was an undercover agent in my own life. I looked at Brent, who was still screaming about the paint. He had no idea. He was so obsessed with the physical control of the house that he had completely lost control of the paper trail. He thought he was burying me, but he was actually digging his own grave. I leaned against the cold metal of the car and allowed myself a small internal smile. It was the first time I had felt hope in 48 hours. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. Brent finished yelling at the movers and marched over to me. He was flushed with the exertion of being a tyrant. He opened the car door and gestured for me to get in. "All right, Pops, time to go. The facility is expecting us at noon, and I have a closing to get to." I sat down on the leather seat. It smelled of new car scent and arrogance. Brent slammed the door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. He walked around to the driver's side and slid in. He started the engine and the dashboard lit up with 100 digital displays. He put the car in gear and we began to roll down the driveway. I turned my head. I pressed my hand against the tinted glass. I looked at the house, my house, the white pillars Coretta and I had painted, the oak tree we had planted when Jasmine was born, the porch where we used to sit and drink iced tea on summer evenings. It looked gray and abandoned in the rain. The movers were already pulling away, leaving mud tracks on the pristine lawn. The for sale sign that had been secretly placed on the lawn this morning was already marked with a sold sticker. I watched the house get smaller and smaller as we drove down the street. I memorized every brick. I memorized the way the roof sloped. I said a silent goodbye to the ghosts of my past. Brent looked in the rearview mirror. He saw me staring back. He misread my silence for sorrow. He misread my focus for confusion. He let out a laugh. It was a light, happy sound that made my skin crawl. "Do not look so sad, Pops. It is just a house. You will love Sunny Hills. They have bingo on Tuesdays. And hey, maybe in a few months, if you are behaving yourself, we will come visit." He waved at Mrs. Higgins as we passed her house. He flashed her a dazzling smile, the smile of a dutiful son. She waved back, looking sad and sympathetic. Brent turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along to the radio. He was victorious. He had done it. He had evicted the old man and secured the asset. He thought the game was over. I turned away from the window and looked straight ahead. The road stretched out before us, gray and wet. I folded my hands into my lap. I did not look at him. I did not say a word. I just listened to him hum and thought about the recording device in my sock and the file box in Taven's trunk. Wave while you can, son. Wave and smile. Because where you are going, there are no windows and there is no one left to wave to. The ride to the nursing home was not a funeral procession. It was the commute to work. And I had a job to do. Sunny Hills sounded like a vacation resort, but the moment the automatic glass doors slid open, I knew it was a waiting room for death. The smell hit me instantly. It was a thick, suffocating cocktail of stale urine, boiled cabbage, and industrial-strength bleach that burned the back of my throat. This was not the ocean view suite Brent had promised. This was a warehouse for the forgotten. I stood in the entryway, clutching the small plastic bag Brent had shoved into my hands. I looked around. The linoleum floors were scuffed and yellowed with age. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a maddening buzz, casting sickly shadows on the peeling beige paint. Along the walls sat rows of wheelchairs filled with people who looked more like statues than human beings. Their heads hung low and their eyes were vacant, staring at a television screen that was playing a cartoon on mute. No one was talking. The only sounds were the distant moans of patients in distress and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on the dirty floor. I felt a cold knot of terror tighten in my stomach. I had built bridges over raging rivers and inspected skyscrapers in high winds, but I had never felt as unsafe as I did standing in the lobby of Sunny Hills. A woman in scrubs that were too tight sat behind a high counter protected by a sheet of plexiglass. She did not look up when I approached. She was chewing gum with an aggressive, open-mouthed rhythm and scrolling through her phone. I stood there for a full minute before she finally acknowledged my existence. She slid a clipboard through the slot without making eye contact. "Fill this out," she said. Her voice was flat and bored. I told her I was Emmett Clay. I told her my son-in-law had just dropped me off. She typed something into her computer and sighed. "Oh, right. The dementia admission. Bed 4B. Orderly will be out in a minute." She went back to her phone. I was not a person to her. I was just a bed number. I was inventory. A large man with tattooed forearms and a shaved head emerged from the double doors behind the desk. His name tag said Marcus, but his eyes said Predator. He grabbed my arm. His grip was unnecessary and painful. "Come on, Pops, let us get you processed." He pulled me through the doors and into a long hallway that smelled even worse than the lobby. We passed rooms where people lay in beds with the rails pulled up, trapped like infants. I heard someone crying for water. I heard someone else screaming for their mother. Marcus ignored it all. He dragged me into a small windowless room and closed the door. "Strip," he ordered. I stood there frozen. I was a 69-year-old man. I was a professional. I had dignity. I said, "Strip," he repeated, stepping closer. "We have to inventory your personal effects and get you into a gown. No outside clothes allowed. Hygiene policy." I slowly began to unbutton my shirt. My fingers were shaking not from cold, but from a rage so intense it made my vision blur. I took off the suit Coretta had bought me. I folded the trousers neatly. I placed them on the metal table. Marcus swept them into a clear plastic bag with a careless swipe of his arm. He grabbed my watch. It was a simple Timex, but it had an inscription on the back from my retirement party. "Hey," I started to protest. Marcus got in my face. His breath smelled of tobacco. No jewelry, policy. He threw the watch into the bag. He took my wallet. He took my shoes. He left me standing there in my underwear, shivering in the recycled air. He handed me a hospital gown that was thin and washed out, covered in a faded pattern of blue geometric shapes. It tied in the back, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I put it on. It felt like a shroud. I was no longer Emmett Clay, the engineer. I was just another body in the system. Marcus grabbed my arm again and marched me down the hall to room 4. It was a small, cramping space with 2 beds separated by a torn curtain. The man in the other bed was curled into a fetal position, mumbling to himself. Marcus pointed to the empty bed. "Sit. Stay. Dinner is at 5. If you make a mess, you clean it up." He turned and left, locking the door from the outside. I sat on the thin mattress. The springs dug into my thighs. I looked at the bare walls. There were no pictures, no clock, no window to the outside world, just a small, reinforced pane of glass in the door where the staff could watch us. I realized with a jolt of panic that Hattie was right. If I had stayed here for a week, I would have truly lost my mind. This place was designed to break the human spirit. It was designed to strip away your identity until you were just a biological function to be managed. I lay back on the pillow, which smelled of vinegar, and closed my eyes. I had to survive the night. Just one night. The sun went down, but the lights in the hallway never turned off. They stayed on a harsh, bright white that seeped under the door and through the thin curtain. The night at Sunny Hills was not a time for rest. It was a time for chaos. The man in the bed next to me, whose name I learned was Silas, began to scream around midnight. He was not screaming in pain. He was screaming at invisible demons. He was thrashing against the bed rails, kicking the metal with a rhythmic clang that echoed in the small room. I lay perfectly still. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and controlled my breathing. I counted prime numbers in my head: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 5, 7. I built a mental wall around my mind, reinforcing it with logic and memories of Coretta. Around 2 in the morning, the door opened. It was not Marcus. It was a different orderly, a younger man with a cruel smile. He walked over to Silas and hit the bed frame with a baton. "Shut up, old man," he hissed. "You are waking up the whole wing." Silas kept screaming. The orderly sighed and pulled a syringe from his pocket. He jabbed it into Silas' arm with zero compassion. Within seconds, Silas went limp. Then the orderly turned to me. He walked over to my bed. He shined a flashlight in my eyes. "You awake, new guy?" I did not move. I kept my breathing shallow. I pretended to be asleep. He leaned down close to my ear. "I know your type," he whispered. "You think you are better than this place. You think someone is coming for you, but nobody comes. Your family dumped you here because they got tired of you. You are garbage now. So do not cause me any trouble, or you will get the same juice as your roommate." He tapped my cheek with the cold metal of the flashlight. It was a violation. It was a threat. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to give him a reason to hurt me. I summoned every ounce of discipline I had learned in 50 years of navigating construction sites and boardrooms. I remained a statue. I let him think I was sedated. I let him think I was broken. After a moment, he grunted and walked away. The door clicked shut. I opened my eyes in the dark. Tears of humiliation burned the corners of my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I turned my head and looked at the wall. I scratched a small mark into the plaster with my fingernail. One mark for one night. I swore to myself it would be the only mark I ever made in this hellhole. I spent the rest of the night listening to the gurgling of the radiator and plotting. I imagined the look on Brent's face when the trap sprung. I imagined Jasmine realizing what she had done. I used my anger as fuel. It kept me warm in the freezing room. It kept me sane in the asylum. I did not sleep. I waited. I watched the crack under the door, waiting for the light to change, waiting for the dawn. At 8 in the morning, the routine began again. The sounds of breakfast trays clattering, the smell of burnt oatmeal. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. Marcus came in with a tray of gray-looking mush. "Eat up, Pops," he said, slamming the tray onto the rolling table. I did not touch it. I just looked at the door. "You are not hungry," Marcus sneered. "Suit yourself. Starving is cheaper." He turned to leave. But before he could reach the door, a commotion erupted in the hallway. I heard the sound of heavy boots. I heard voices raised in authority. And then I heard a voice I recognized. It was sharp, clear, and cutting like a diamond saw. "Step aside before I have you arrested for obstruction of justice." The door to my room flew open. It hit the wall with a bang that made Marcus jump. Standing in the doorway was Hattie Bloom. She was wearing a blood-red suit that looked like a declaration of war. Behind her stood 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a dark suit holding a briefcase. Hattie looked at the room. She looked at Silas, drugged and drooling in the next bed. She looked at the tray of slop, and then she looked at me. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before hardening into steel. "Mr. Clay," she said, her voice ringing with power. "Grab your things. We are leaving." Marcus stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest. "You cannot just take a patient. He is under a guardianship. I need to see authorization." Hattie stepped into his space. She shoved a piece of paper into his chest with enough force to make him stumble back. "This is a court order from a federal judge signed 20 minutes ago, immediately suspending the guardianship of Brent Vance due to pending criminal fraud charges. It also grants me temporary custody of Emmett Clay and orders an immediate independent medical evaluation." She looked Marcus up and down with pure disgust. "And if you do not move out of my way in 3 seconds, I will add a charge of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment to the lawsuit I am filing against this facility before lunch." 1, 2. Marcus moved. He shrank against the wall, looking suddenly very small. Hattie walked over to me. She offered me her arm. "Are you ready to go, Emmett?" I stood up. My knees were stiff, but I felt 10 feet tall. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the gray oatmeal. "I am ready," I said. We walked out of the room. We walked down the hallway past the staring nurses and the terrified orderlies. We walked through the lobby where the receptionist stopped chewing her gum and gaped at the police officers. We walked out the automatic doors and into the fresh morning air. The sun was shining. The rain had stopped. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that tasted like freedom. I looked at Hattie. "Did he sign it?" I asked. Hattie smiled a wolfish grin. "He is at the closing right now," she said, checking her watch. "He just signed the deed 5 minutes ago. The trap is sprung. Now let us go catch a rat." The atmosphere inside Le Jardin was electric with the buzzing energy of unearned wealth. Through the glass partition of the private dining room, I could see them. It was the same room where they had toasted to my demise 3 nights ago, but tonight the celebration was exponentially larger. Brent had rented out the entire mezzanine level. There were at least 40 people crowded around tables laden with silver platters of oysters and towers of chilled crab legs. I recognized the faces. These were not friends. These were investors. There were the sharks from the real estate firm men who smelled blood in the water and circled accordingly. There were the bankers who looked the other way when signatures did not quite match. And there was Jasmine. My daughter sat at the head of the table next to her husband, wearing a dress that likely cost more than my first car. She looked radiant on the surface, but from where I stood in the shadows of the vestibule, I could see the tightness around her eyes. She was drinking wine with a desperation that betrayed her guilt. She was trying to drown the memory of her father pleading in the kitchen. Brent was standing on a chair. He looked like a king addressing his court. His face was flushed with expensive scotch and the adrenaline of the con. He held a crystal flute high in the air, the bubbles catching the light of the chandelier. He was shouting over the din of the crowd, making a speech about vision and legacy. He was telling them that the acquisition of the Clay estate was just the beginning. He called it a distressed asset that he had heroically salvaged. He spoke of me as if I were already dead, a beloved but incompetent patriarch who had been safely tucked away for his own good. The crowd murmured their approval. They raised their glasses. They did not care about the human cost of their dividends. They only cared about the bottom line. I adjusted the cuffs of the navy blue bespoke suit Hattie Bloom had brought to the hospital for me. It was sharper and more modern than anything I had worn in years. It fit me like a second skin. It felt like armor. I reached up and touched the knot of my silk tie. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of butter and garlic and expensive perfume. It was the smell of the life I was supposed to be living. It was the smell of the table I had been denied. I looked at the restaurant manager, the man with the thin mustache who had barred my entry before. He was standing near the coat check, holding a stack of menus. When he saw me step out of the shadows, accompanied by a uniformed police officer and a woman who radiated lethal legal authority, he dropped the menus. The heavy laminate folders clattered to the floor, but he did not bend to pick them up. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He recognized me, but he could not reconcile the wet, shivering beggar from Tuesday with the titan standing before him now. I gave him a look that dared him to speak. He stepped back, pressing himself against the wall, making himself as small as possible. He knew that the balance of power had just shifted violently. I nodded to Hattie. She signaled to the officer. It was time. I pushed the double mahogany doors open with both hands. I did not slam them. I did not kick them. I opened them with the steady, deliberate force of a man who owns the building. The heavy wood swung wide, revealing the party in all its decadent glory. For a few seconds, the noise continued. The laughter and the clinking of silverware masked my entry. Then the people nearest the door turned. They saw me. The chatter died away in a ripple effect spreading from the entrance to the back of the room until the silence was absolute. It was a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the corner. Brent was still standing on the chair, his glass raised, his mouth open mid-sentence. He was looking at the back of the room, wondering why everyone had gone quiet. He turned slowly. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical curtain falling. His hand went slack. The crystal flute slipped from his fingers. It hit the table and shattered, spraying champagne over the white tablecloth and onto Jasmine's dress. She screamed a short, sharp sound of surprise. She jumped up, brushing at the wet fabric. Then she looked up to see what had distracted her husband. When she saw me, her legs gave out. Legs. She collapsed back into her chair, clutching the tablecloth with white knuckles. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. And in a way she was. She was seeing the ghost of the father she had betrayed returned to haunt her. I walked into the room. The sound of my leather shoes on the hardwood floor was a steady rhythmic drum beat. Click, click, click. I did not look left or right. I kept my eyes locked on Brent. I stopped 10 feet away from their table. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my chin raised. I let the silence stretch. I let them sweat in it. I let every person in that room look from the confident, powerful man standing before them to the terrified, sweat-drenched man standing on the chair. Brent recovered first. His survival instinct kicked in. He scrambled down from the chair, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He forced a smile onto his face, but it looked like a rictus of terror. He held his hands up, palms facing me as if trying to calm a wild animal. "Pops," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Oh my God, how did you get here?" He turned to the crowd, his eyes darting wildly. "It is okay, everyone. This is my father-in-law. He has severe dementia. He must have wandered away from the facility. Please stay calm. He can be aggressive when he is confused." He looked at me with fake pity, masking real panic. "Pops, you are not safe here. You need your medication. Where is your nurse? Did you run away?" He was doubling down. He was committing to the lie in front of 50 witnesses. It was bold, it was desperate, and it was exactly what Hattie wanted. He reached for his phone. "I need security," he yelled, looking toward the entrance. "Someone call security. My father is having a psychotic break. He is a danger to the guests." I did not move. I did not shout. I simply watched him flail. 2 large men in black suits appeared from the hallway. They were the restaurant security. They started moving toward me, reaching for my arms. Brent sighed with relief. He thought the cavalry had arrived. He thought he could just drag me out again and spin a story about how sad it was to see me decline. But the security guards never reached me. From the kitchen door, a figure stepped out, blocking their path. It was Tavon. He was not wearing his mechanic jumpsuit. He was wearing a dark suit that I had bought for him that morning. He looked formidable. He crossed his huge arms over his chest and shook his head. "He is not going anywhere," Tavon said. His voice was deep and rumbled through the floorboards. The guards hesitated. They looked at Tavon, then they looked at the front door where the police officer was now standing with his arms crossed. Brent looked around. He saw the exits were blocked. He saw Hattie Bloom step out from behind me holding a thick leather briefcase. He recognized her. Every crooked businessman in the city knew Hattie Bloom. He knew that if she was here, this was not a social call. I finally spoke. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the man who has calculated the structural integrity of the building and knows exactly where the weak point is. "Sit down, Brent." The command whipped through the room. I said, "Sit down. You are making a scene." Brent tried to laugh. It came out as a squeak. "Pops, listen to me. You are confused. We sold the house. We have the papers. You are not in charge anymore." I took a step closer. "I am not confused, Brent. I know exactly what day it is. I know exactly where I am. And I know exactly whose money you are spending on this party." I looked at the crowd. I addressed the investors directly. "Gentlemen, my name is Emmett Clay. I am the owner of the property my son-in-law claims to have sold this morning. I am here to inform you that the sale is fraudulent. The deed was signed under duress, and the seller, namely me, was declared mentally incompetent by the very man sitting at that table." I pointed a finger at Dr. Thorne, who was trying to sneak under the table. "So if anyone here has written a check to Mr. Vance, I suggest you cancel it before the bank opens on Monday, because as of 5 minutes ago, his assets have been frozen by the federal government." The room erupted. People started shouting. Investors started grabbing their phones. Brent looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at Jasmine. She was weeping silently, her face buried in her hands. "You are lying," Brent screamed. He lunged toward me. He lost control. He wanted to hit me. He wanted to silence the truth with violence. Tavon moved faster than a striking cobra. He stepped in front of me and caught Brent by the lapels of his expensive jacket. He shoved him back into his chair with enough force to knock the wind out of him. "Sit down," Tavon growled. "The man is speaking." I looked at Brent, slouched in his chair, gasping for air. I looked at the ruin of his celebration. "You wanted a party, Brent. You wanted to be the king. Well, here I am. The king has returned." And I brought the executioner with me. I nodded to Hattie. She placed the briefcase on the table, crushing a plate of oysters. She popped the latches. The sound was loud and final. "Shall we begin?" she asked. Hattie Bloom moved with the precision of a conductor stepping onto a podium. She did not shout and she did not wave her arms. She simply walked over to the audio-visual console that Brent had set up for his victory speech. The laptop was still humming, displaying a slideshow of Brent standing in front of my house with a sold sign. Hattie unplugged his laptop with a sharp tug and inserted a flash drive of her own. The screen behind the stage flickered. It went black for a terrifying second and then illuminated the room with a harsh white light. The image on the screen was not a graph of profits. It was a high-resolution scan of a medical document. It was the competency evaluation signed by Dr. Eris Thorne. I watched the crowd. The investors squinted at the screen, reading the diagnosis. Advanced dementia. Unable to manage affairs. Then Hattie pressed a button on the remote. The audio system, which had been playing smooth jazz a moment ago, crackled to life. A voice filled the room. It was loud and clear and undeniably Brent Vance. He is a vegetable, Brent. A walking, talking vegetable. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. Brent froze. He looked at the speakers as if they were possessed. Hattie did not stop there. She clicked the next file. "Professional services are not free, Mr. Clay. $1 million sale has enough slices of pie for the doctor, the son-in-law, and the broker." That was Dr. Thorne's voice. I looked at the doctor. He was trying to crawl out from under the table, but the police officer blocked his path with a shiny black boot. Thorne slumped against the table leg, covering his face with his hands. Brent finally found his voice. It was a high-pitched screech of denial. "That is fake. This is deep fake technology. My father-in-law hired a hacker. You cannot believe this." Hattie ignored him. She clicked again. A video appeared on the screen. It was grainy but clear enough. It showed the interior of my living room. It showed Brent handing me a pen. It showed him forcing a confused old man to sign a document. And then Hattie zoomed in. She zoomed in on the signature line. The image enlarged until the shaky ink filled the entire wall. I watched the investors lean forward. They were money men. They knew how to read the fine print. They saw the jagged letters. They saw the hesitation marks. And then they saw what I had hidden in plain sight. The letters were not CLAY. They were TRAP. A murmur went through the room. One of the bankers, a heavy-set man with a red face, stood up. He pointed at the screen. "That is not a signature. That is a cry for help." Brent looked at the screen. For the first time he saw what I had done. He saw the trap I had laid right under his nose. His mouth fell open. He looked at me. I stood there with my hands clasped behind my back, looking him dead in the eye. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just let the weight of his own stupidity crush him. Hattie turned off the screen. The room plunged back into semi-darkness, but the damage was done. She picked up a microphone and walked to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and professional, "you have just seen evidence of medical fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. But that is the boring part. Let us talk about the money." She turned to Brent. "You believe you sold the house this morning for $1.2 million. You believe you wired those funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Brent puffed out his chest slightly, trying to salvage some dignity. "I did sell it," he stammered. "The money is gone. You cannot touch it. It is in an international trust." I stepped forward. This was my moment. I shook my head slowly. "No, Brent. You did not sell the house to a stranger. You sold it to a company called Phoenix LLC. I paused, letting the name sink in. Phoenix LLC is a holding company incorporated yesterday morning. Its sole shareholder is me, Emmett Clay. Brent blinked. He shook his head, trying to process the math. "What? That is impossible. You do not have any money." "I checked your accounts." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "You checked the accounts you knew about. You did not know about the West Creek land sale. I sold that land legitimately 3 days ago to the city for the highway expansion. I used that capital to buy my own house back from you." The room went deadly silent. The irony was so thick you could taste it. "So let me clarify the transaction for everyone," I continued. "You stole my house using a fake medical diagnosis. Then you sold my house back to me using my own money. But here's the best part. Since the FBI flagged the transaction as suspicious due to the large cash transfer from a newly formed entity, all the funds have been frozen. I pointed to the phone in his hand. "Check your account, Brent." "Go ahead. Open the app." Brent scrambled to unlock his phone. His fingers were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He finally got it open. He tapped the banking app. He stared at the screen. His eyes bulged. He let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "Zero. It says 0. I nodded. "Actually, it is less than 0. The IRS has also placed a lien on your personal assets for attempted money laundering, because you see selling a stolen house to yourself is a federal crime called laundering proceeds of unlawful activity." The investors began to shout. They realized their money was gone too. They realized Brent had promised them returns on a criminal enterprise. The heavy-set banker lunged at Brent. "You told us this was clean," he roared. "You told us the old man was a vegetable." Taven stepped in and held the banker back. "We did not need a riot. We needed justice." Hattie looked at the police officers. She gave a small, sharp nod. "Officers, I believe you have heard enough to establish probable cause." The two officers stepped forward. They unclipped the handcuffs from their belts. The metal clicking sound cut through the noise of the angry crowd. Brent looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Jasmine. "Jazz, do something," he pleaded. "Tell them. Tell them he is crazy." Jasmine sat frozen in her chair. She looked at the screen where the evidence of her husband's cruelty had just been broadcast. She looked at me standing tall and sane. She looked at Brent sweating and begging. She slowly picked up her napkin and dabbed her mouth. She did not look at him. She looked at the floor. "I cannot help you, Brent," she whispered. Brent snapped. The reality of his situation finally pierced his narcissism. He was not going to Cabo. He was going to prison. He let out a feral growl and shoved the table over. Plates and glasses crashed to the floor. He tried to run. He sprinted toward the kitchen door, thinking he could escape through the back alley. He made it 3 steps. One of the security guards, the same ones he had tried to order around earlier, stepped into his path. The guard did not use gentle hands. He stuck out a heavy boot and tripped Brent. Brent went down hard. He hit the floor face first, sliding across the polished wood in a tangle of limbs and spilled champagne. Before he could scramble up, the police were on him. I watched as they kneeled on his back. I watched as they pulled his arms behind him. I heard the snap of the wrist bones as they forced them together. I heard the click of the ratchet on the handcuffs tightening. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Get off me!" Brent screamed, spitting blood onto the floor. "Do you know who I am?" The officer hauled him to his feet. "Yeah, we know who you are, pal," the officer said. "You are the guy who just assaulted a floor. You have the right to remain silent." They dragged him past me. His suit was ruined. His nose was bleeding. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You set me up," he hissed. "You senile old bat. You set me up." I leaned in close. I wanted him to remember this moment for the next 10 years in his cell. "I am an engineer, Brent," I said softly. "I build things that last, and I demolish things that are dangerous. You were dangerous." I watched them march him out the front door. The flashing blue lights of the squad cars illuminated the room, washing over the faces of the stunned guests. The party was over. The music had stopped. The king was dethroned. I looked at Hattie. She was packing up her briefcase. She looked tired but satisfied. I looked at Tavon. He gave me a thumbs up. I looked at the empty chair where Brent had stood. I felt a great weight lift off my chest. The house was mine. The money was safe. But more importantly, the fear was gone. I had walked into the fire and I had come out unburned. I straightened my tie and turned to face my daughter. It was time for the final piece of business. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, taking the chaos and the noise with them. The restaurant was quiet now, save for the sound of the staff sweeping up broken glass and the murmur of Hattie Bloom speaking to the lead detective in the corner. I stood in the center of the room, feeling a strange hollowness in my chest. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the last 3 days was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a dull ache in my joints and a sharp clarity in my mind. I turned slowly to face the last piece of debris from the wreckage of my life. Jasmine was sitting on the floor near the overturned table. Her expensive designer dress was stained with champagne and dirt. Her makeup was smeared, creating dark hollows around her eyes that made her look like a skull. She was trembling, not with the cold, but with the terrifying realization that her shield was gone. Brent was the villain, but Brent was also her protector and her meal ticket. Now he was in handcuffs, and she was alone in a room with the father she had tried to destroy. She looked up and saw me watching her. For a moment I saw calculation in her eyes. I saw her mind working, trying to find the angle, trying to find the script that would save her. She pushed herself up from the floor. She wobbled slightly on her high heels, then took a step toward me. Her hands came up in a pleading gesture, palms open, defenseless. "Daddy," she whispered. The word hung in the air like a poisonous vapor. It was the word she used when she wanted a new car. It was the word she used when she wanted me to pay for her wedding. It was a word that used to open my heart, but now it just sounded like a rusty key turning in a broken lock. She rushed forward, closing the distance between us. She reached out to grab my hands, but I stepped back. It was a small movement, just 6 inches, but it might as well have been 6 miles. Her hands grasped at empty air. She froze. A fresh wave of tears spilled over her cheeks. "Daddy, please, you have to listen to me," she sobbed. Her voice rose in pitch, becoming hysterical. "I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know how bad it was. Brent lied to me. He told me everything was legal. He told me you were sick. He made me believe it." She took a breath, gasping for air. She looked around the room as if searching for witnesses to her victimhood. "He forced me, Daddy. You know how he gets. He has a temper. I was scared of him. He threatened to leave me. He threatened to take everything. I was trapped. I just wanted to protect you. I thought if you were in the facility, you would be safe from him. I did it for you." She fell to her knees. It was a dramatic gesture, a performance worthy of an award. She clutched the hem of my trousers, burying her face in the fabric. "I am a victim too," she wailed. "He used me. He stole my inheritance too. Look at me. I have nothing. Please, Daddy, tell them to let me go. Tell them I am innocent. We can go home now. Just you and me. I will take care of you. I promise. I will make it up to you." I looked down at the top of her head. I saw the dark roots showing through her blonde dye job. I smelled the expensive perfume mixing with the scent of fear and stale wine. I listened to her sobbing, and I tried to find a spark of sympathy in my heart. I tried to remember the little girl in pigtails who used to sit on my lap while I drew blueprints. I tried to remember the teenager who baked me a cake for my 50th birthday. But those memories felt like they belonged to another man. The man standing here was the man who had slept in a coat closet to avoid being detected. The man who had been stripped and humiliated in a nursing home. She kept talking, babbling excuses. She blamed Brent for the forgery. She blamed Dr. Thorne for the diagnosis. She blamed the economy. She blamed the stress. She blamed everything and everyone except herself. She was rewriting history in real time, trying to paint herself as the naive daughter caught in the web of a bad man. But I had the recording in my pocket. I had the memory of her voice in the kitchen the night before. I knew the truth. I reached down and took her wrists. Her skin was clammy. I pulled her hands away from my legs. I did not pull her up. I simply detached her from me. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through her wailing like a blade. She stopped crying instantly. She looked up at me, sniffing, expecting to see forgiveness. She expected to see the soft old man she had manipulated for years. "Get up, Jasmine." She scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She offered me a tentative, hopeful smile. "You believe me, right, Daddy? You know I would never hurt you." I looked her in the eye. The silence stretched out long and uncomfortable. I let her hope build for a second, just so she could feel the weight of it before I crushed it. "I believe you are scared," I said, my tone flat and clinical. "I believe you are sorry that you got caught. But I do not believe you are innocent, and I certainly do not believe you are a victim." Her smile faltered. Her eyes darted back and forth. "What do you mean?" "I told you he forced me." I shook my head slowly. I began to dismantle her defense with the precision of an engineer taking apart a faulty engine. "No, Jasmine. He did not force you to roll your eyes when I asked for help in the car. He did not force you to tell me to go to sleep when I begged you in the kitchen last night. I gave you an out. I sat right next to you and offered you a chance to save our home. I offered you a chance to choose me. And you looked me in the face and told me I was crazy." She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand to silence her. "You did not do that because you were scared of Brent. You did that because you wanted the money. You wanted the lifestyle. You wanted the trips to Cabo and the new cars and the freedom from having to care for an aging father. You looked at me and you saw a burden. You looked at that nursing home and you saw a dumpster where you could throw away your responsibilities." I took a step closer to her. She shrank back, hitting the edge of the table. "You say you were trapped, but you had the keys to the car. You had a phone. You had my money in your account for years. You were not a prisoner, Jasmine. You were an accomplice. You held the flashlight while he dug my grave." Jasmine flinched as if I had slapped her. The reality of my words hit her hard. She realized that the confused old man act was over. She was speaking to Emmett Clay, and he saw everything. "But I am your daughter," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You cannot just leave me. I have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. The house is sold. I have no money. I have no job." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a white envelope. I had prepared it with Hattie earlier that afternoon. It was thin. "I am not leaving you," I said, handing her the envelope. "I am setting you free." She grabbed the envelope, tearing it open with frantic fingers. She pulled out the contents. It was a single one-way bus ticket to Phoenix, Arizona, and $500 in cash. She stared at the cash. She looked up at me in horror. $500. Daddy, this will not last a week. What am I supposed to do in Phoenix? I looked at her with a cold detachment that surprised even me. "You are 35 years old, Jasmine. You have a college degree that I paid for. You have 2 hands and 2 feet. You are going to do what I did when I was your age. You are going to work." I gestured to the door. "That ticket leaves in 3 hours. I suggest you be on it. Because as of tomorrow morning, the locks on the house will be changed again. And this time you do not have the code." She stared at me. Her mouth worked, trying to form words, trying to find the leverage she had always used. "But the house," she stammered. "Mom wanted me to have the house." That was the wrong thing to say. Mentioning Coretta was a mistake. "Your mother wanted you to have a home." I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She did not want you to have an asset to liquidate. You lost the right to that house the moment you signed the paper to sell it. You sold your birthright for a glass of champagne, Jasmine. Do not ask for a refund now." I turned away from her. I signaled to Tavon, who was waiting by the door. "Please escort Ms. Clay to the bus station," I said. "Make sure she gets on the bus." Jasmine screamed. She threw the envelope on the floor. "I hate you," she shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of entitlement. "You are a cruel old man. You are going to die alone in that big empty house, and I will not be there to bury you." I stopped. I did not turn around. I spoke to the empty room. I would rather die alone with my dignity than live with a snake in my bed. I heard Tavon step forward. I heard Jasmine struggling. I heard her cursing me as he firmly guided her out the door. I did not look back. I listened until her voice faded into the night. When the door closed, the silence returned. But this time it was not empty. It was clean. It was the silence of a structure that has been purged of rot. I walked over and picked up the envelope she had thrown. I put the cash back in my pocket. I left the ticket on the table. She would come back for it. She had no choice. Survival is a powerful motivator. Hattie walked over and placed a hand on my arm. She did not say anything. She did not offer platitudes. She just squeezed my arm, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. "Is it done?" she asked. I looked at the table where the champagne had spilled. I looked at the broken glass. "It is done," I said. "The bridge is burned. Now we can build a new one." I straightened my jacket. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. I was 69 years old. I had no wife. I had no daughter. But as I looked up at the stars clearing through the storm clouds, I realized something. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that restaurant and left my old life behind on the floor amidst the shattered glass and spilled champagne. The seasons have turned a full circle, and the winter rain that once soaked my suit has given way to a spring so vibrant it feels like the earth itself is celebrating my survival. I am sitting on my front porch, the same porch where the movers once threw my life into garbage bags. But today, there are no bags. There are only pots of blooming hydrangeas that I planted myself, digging my hands into the soil that I fought so hard to keep. The house behind me is no longer a mausoleum of memories or a crime scene of betrayal. It is alive. It breathes. The silence that used to suffocate me has been replaced by the sounds of living. The smell of stale anxiety and deception is gone, replaced by the aroma of brewing coffee and the sweet scent of lemon polish. I live here alone in the technical sense, but I am far from solitary. My days are filled with purpose. I have returned to consulting work not because I need the money, but because I have a mind that refuses to rust. I help design community centers and libraries, places that build people up rather than tearing them down. I have also become something of a local legend in the legal community. Hattie Bloom and I have formed a foundation dedicated to helping seniors protect their assets from predatory relatives. We call it the Coretta Initiative. Every week I sit across from men and women who look just as scared as I was that night in the rain, and I tell them my story. I watch the hope return to their eyes. I watch them straighten their spines. I give them the blueprint to rebuild their dignity. As for the ghosts of my past, they are fading. I received a letter from the state penitentiary last week. The return address said Brent Vance. I did not open it. I did not feel curiosity or anger. I simply walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in among the coffee grounds and eggshells. He belongs to the refuse of my life, and I do not recycle toxic waste. Jasmine is still in Phoenix. I hear she is working as a waitress in a diner. I hope she is learning the value of $1 earned by sweat rather than theft. I do not hate her anymore. Hate requires energy, and I have none to spare for her. She is simply a stranger who once knew my name. I have reclaimed my peace, and it is a fortress that no one will ever breach again. The front door opens, and I do not flinch. I do not check the lock. I know exactly who it is. Taven walks out onto the porch holding 2 mugs of tea. He looks different than the man I met in the alley. The shadows under his eyes are gone, replaced by a light that comes from security and self-respect. He is finishing his certification to become a paralegal working directly under Hattie Bloom. She tells me he is the sharpest mind she has seen in 20 years. He hands me a mug and sits on the rocking chair next to me. We do not need to say much. We share the comfortable silence of 2 soldiers who survived the same war, but today he is not alone. A small whirlwind of energy bursts through the screen door. It is his daughter, Nia. She is 5 years old with hair in braided pigtails and a smile that could power the entire city grid. She runs to me and climbs onto my lap without hesitation. She does not see a bank account or a house. She sees her grandpa Emmett. That is what she calls me. It is a title I did not inherit by blood, but earned by loyalty. It is the most important title I hold. "Come on, Grandpa," she says, pulling on my hand. It is time for my lesson. I stand up, my knees protesting only slightly. We walk inside to the living room. There in the corner stands the baby grand piano. It is polished to a high shine. This is the piano Jasmine wanted to sell. She called it a dust collector. She said it took up too much space. She calculated its value in dollars and cents. But to me, it is an instrument of the soul. I lift the fallboard, revealing the ivory and ebony keys that have waited years to sing again. I lift Nia onto the bench. Her feet dangle above the pedals. I sit beside her. I place my large, rough hands over her tiny, smooth ones. I teach her how to shape her fingers like she is holding a bubble she does not want to burst. We start with a simple scale. C, D, E. The notes ring out clear and true, filling the house with music. Focus on the rhythm, I tell her softly. Listen to the space between the notes. That is where the music lives. She scrunches her nose in concentration, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth. She plays a simple melody. It is halting and imperfect, but to my ears, it is a symphony. I watch her. I see the future in her eyes. I see a girl who will grow up knowing she is safe. She will grow up knowing she is loved not for what she can give, but for who she is. I am teaching her to play, but she is teaching me to feel again. Jasmine wanted to silence this house. She wanted to turn it into a quiet, empty asset. But now it is loud. It is messy. It is full of wrong notes and laughter and the sound of Tavon clapping from the kitchen. This piano was almost a casualty of greed. Now it is the centerpiece of a new legacy. I look at Tavon leaning against the doorframe watching us. He nods. I nod back. We are building something here that cannot be signed away or stolen. We are building a family. When the lesson is over and the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, I step back out onto the porch. The air is cool. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet evening air. I look up at the vast expanse of the blue sky. It is limitless. I think about the man I was a year ago, the man shivering in the rain, the man who thought his life was over. I wish I could go back and tell him that the end is just the beginning of a better story. I wish I could tell him that the betrayal was necessary to clear the ground for the blessing. I put my hand in my pocket and feel the old brass key to my front door. It is cold and solid. I am 69 years old. I have lost a wife. I have lost a daughter. I have lost my innocence regarding the cruelty of human nature. But I have found myself. I have found a son. I have found a granddaughter. I have found a mission. They tried to bury me. They did not know I was a seed. They tried to break me. They did not know I was made of iron. They tried to write my ending. They did not know I held the pen. I look at the street where the neighbors wave to me with genuine respect, now not pity. I look at the house that stands strong behind me. I smile. It is not a smile of triumph. It is a smile of contentment. There is an old saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think the best revenge is not caring enough to serve them anything at all. The best revenge is waking up in a house you own, surrounded by people who love you, and watching the sun rise on a day that belongs entirely to you. I am Emmett Clay. I am still standing. And as I watch the first star appear in the twilight, I know one thing for certain. My life is not a tragedy. It is a masterpiece. And I am just getting started. This journey taught me that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by who is willing to bleed for you when the wolves come. I spent years trying to buy my daughter's love with silence and sacrifice, only to realize that true love never requires you to destroy yourself. The greatest victory was not reclaiming my house, but reclaiming my dignity. To anyone feeling erased or underestimated, remember this. Your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Stand tall, speak your truth, and never be afraid to burn a bridge that leads to nowhere, because sometimes that fire lights the way to your true home. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and resilience. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to make the hard choice to cut off a family member to save your own peace. I will be reading your stories.